Look at this. Now look at it. You gave me your word on this. Your word, Clarence. But here you are, taking it up with Yonetta in her best precincts, and then taking it up with my girl Daniels, where she's running strong.
Oh, Adele, this is the first I've seen this. Come on now, this is probably Yonetta's people pulling this shit.
With a Citizens for Royce authority line? Huh. Look at you, Clarence. Just look at you. You've forgotten your agenda. You've forgotten your base. You think a shave and some Marcus Garvey posters are gonna get you over?
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. Hello again, welcome back to Caught on the Wire. It's Alex, I'm here with Toby once again, and we're here for Season 4, Episode 5, Alliances. This is, well, I was going to say it's an important episode, but something about Season 4 is every episode feels important. This is a really great piece of work, looking forward to getting stuck into it, and it's been quite a good week for the podcast as well, sort of outside, and we've had some messages, and I know that an anonymous person of great generosity decided to post the podcast on the Wire subreddit. If you're into Reddit, then you may be aware of that. You may be joining us at this very point, having discovered us on Reddit, in which case, welcome to the podcast. Actually, the source who posted it isn't all that anonymous. I know who it is, but...
A great friend of mine, I believe, was the first line. Yeah. No,
but I shall keep them anonymous for the purposes of the podcast itself, because...
No, absolutely. No, we
more mystery.
We did try to post the podcast on the subreddit when we first.
Oh, he's going to talk about it. He's going to talk about the great snubbing of the Wire subreddit. Tell the story, Toby.
It's no longer confidential information. But yeah,
we're going public.
It was one of the key things when you set up the podcast. Sort of, create an iTunes account is obviously a very major one. Get the appropriate recording equipment. That took me a couple of weeks, as I'm sure some of the listeners will remember from the very sketchy early podcasts, and then obviously start promoting it. And Reddit's a great place. The subreddit's very active, and there's a lot of good stuff going on there, and for some reason it was caught by the spam filters and it never got out of there, so we're quite glad that someone else came along and finally gave it a seeing to on Reddit. It's had an airing on Reddit, so hopefully
it never made it out of there, despite attempts at diplomacy.
Yeah.
Which were met with surprising hostility.
There were
by
communications.
The management of the subreddit.
Yeah. So.
Well, not hostility. Like, that's unfair.
No, but I think that there was some.
They weren't willing to entertain us, which
concern.
I mean is they moderate it. Like that's up to them. It wasn't like the end of the world, but we thought that people might like sort of something that was, I suppose, original content in some sense, and was like engaging, trying to get other people to get involved, but no. So we kind of left it at that and didn't ever try again. And then I was kind of pointed towards the fact that it had been posted on the Wire subreddit, so I just kind of kept an eye on it.
Yeah, which is very good, and was
some really good responses as well, which is really heartwarming. Kind of makes you really want to just crack into each episode really well. Like.
Definitely, yeah. It's been a really, really nice week for that, certainly. And we'll see if the listenership changes at all with Reddit now knowing about us, so we will have to see. In terms of other listeners and more long-term listeners, I believe Listeners Corner has had some new instalments this week, right?
That's right. We've heard from 2 very regular listeners and very regular commenters. We've had a lot of messages, and but the first one that I'm going to read out is from a new listener, someone I don't believe we've heard from before. Gil or Jill, I'm not sure which one it is, so forgive me. I'm going to go with Gil for the purposes of this.
Okay.
Substitute as appropriate.
It's GIL, isn't it? So it could be anything. Yeah.
There's a character in The Simpsons called Gil.
Gil.
and it's Gil. So I'm going with that.
Let's go, Gil.
Oh, Gil. I'm going with that.
All right.
So Gil says that he loves the podcast. Says that he's a former resident of Baltimore and current resident of London. Is in your town, Toby.
Whoa. It's a big town.
So he says that he's especially interested in our take on society being depicted. He also goes on to say, quote, "I feel like I have something I want to point out after every episode but never get around to writing. But I did want to point out one tidbit that you missed in the most recent episode that would be of particular interest in the context of the podcast world. The park Lester and Bunk's search for bodies is well-known body dumping ground Leakin Park, which is where real-life murder victim Hae Min Lee, the subject of the recent podcast Serial, was found. Lester even tells the same anecdote recounted on Serial about cops being told, we're looking for one specific body. If we pick up everybody we find, we're going to be here all day, basically." And he thought that we'd enjoy that little connection there. So, yeah, a little connection in the podcast world. And Serial is isn't it like a spin-off or something of This American Life?
Quite possibly. I know that's a really, really
With
popular podcast.
was it Ira Glass? I don't really know it all that well, but I know Ira Glass is, and I know that he kind of did that. Serial, as I understand it, is a very popular podcast.
Yeah, and good on Gil for beating us to it, really. We haven't yet discussed Leicester's trip to Leakin Park. We will in the next 2 hours, I imagine. So we'll be able to chime in with those comments when we get to that point. And certainly I did not know that fact at all going into this. So, yeah, really appreciate the enriching knowledge that we get from the listeners.
There must be an interesting way to transition between Baltimore and London as well. Would be interested to hear some of the more striking differences, even if they may, I don't know, in some ways seem obvious. Just that kind of perspective can be interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks, Gil, for getting in touch, and feel free to get in touch again anytime. Let's move on to some Caught on the Wire veterans, starting with Dan, who has contacted us several times before. This is Dan Weissmeyer, I assume that's how it's pronounced, who is also a fellow musician, and he's shared quite a lot of in-depth notes with us and his thoughts on various parts of the podcast that we've done. He has a few thoughts this week, firstly on Marlo and Prop Joe, and he says, "I wasn't sure about the handshake in this scene. Am I right in thinking you guys saw it as Marlo joining the co-op? I've always seen Marlo's abrupt interruption and repetition of his 'no one fucks with me now' line as his rejection to joining the co-op. The handshake was his way of ending the discussion instantly and turning down Joe's proposition about joining or dealing with the New York boys. In response to this, Joe then sets the ball rolling on one of his devious schemes by tipping Omar off to Marlo's card game. And this leads to Marlo changing his mind and joining the co-op and running off the New York boys." That's mainly that bit. So I don't recall us saying that we thought it was him joining the co-op. I thought it was just him being very confident about the fact that his position was already stable. He already said, what does he care about East Baltimore? So I think he's just kind of being surprisingly cordial, and his respect for Joe, and maybe respect is the wrong word. Maybe he doesn't seem like the kind of person who really seems to respect anyone. He just kind of uses people that are...
It's more him saying, "I understand that you respect me," more than anything, I guess. But
yeah.
I certainly last week, I, having not remembered the show too well, I did think that that handshake was joining up with the co-op, and we discussed how it would be the worst thing that Prop Joe would ever do at that point. And of course, watching this week's, we now learn that was, of course, not what the intention was behind the handshake and not what the meaning was at all. And so it's good that Dan can come along and reiterate that for us and make it clear that we did get it wrong, or I certainly got it wrong last week. So, yeah.
I don't remember exactly what I said.
Yeah, I do.
But thinking back on it again, that was kind of what I thought about it. But yeah, no, it's important to kind of reiterate these bits because there is just so much. Can't remember it all, really.
The plot gets very intricate later in the show, and there's just so much to remember. So, yeah.
Dan also likes that we talked about Chris's patience in relation to Omar. And he says that this kind of patience, it's something that Michael learns directly from Chris in Season 5. And as we know, the show quite overtly indicates that Michael steps into the shoes of Omar at the end of Season 5. So I think the comparison you made between Chris and Omar is particularly relevant here.
Yeah.
That's just an interesting part about the kind of different forms of, but somewhat similar styles of having patience on the job.
Definitely.
And Michael learns how to do that much later on.
Yeah, absolutely. I that is quite an important part of the end of season 5 when Michael is trained in the art of waiting, and it hadn't crossed my mind at all when we spoke about Chris waiting last week. So it's nice that someone does make that connection between those two important plot strands, and obviously that just strengthens the show even more, makes things hold up all the way through rather than just sort of when those moments arrive. So yeah, really nice to make that connection, definitely.
And Dan also talks quite a bit about the security guard that is killed in last week's episode. He says, "To this day, I'm still not sure why Marlo went to the trouble of having this poor chap killed. In the heat of the moment, I can understand Marlo has just lost a card game, and with it a degree of credibility or rep, which we all know he thrives on. So you could argue Marlo was taking it out on the next person to cross his path. But the way the security guard is given the full Chris and Snoop treatment, being scoped out for days and disposed of in the vacants, etc., strikes me as a waste of time and energy. Unlike with the deaths of Lex and others, this security guard is not in the game, and therefore his death or disappearance surely doesn't resonate around the streets or add anything to Marlo's fearsome reputation, particularly as no one else even knows it's happened." So yeah, just a kind of that's just a bit of summary of what he was talking about there. I think we did discuss this a little bit in the previous episode about how there is a certain rep element. He kind of reclaims what he's lost in the card game because he has been somewhat humiliated there.
Yeah.
And also, Marlo really is a bit of a psycho. Like, he doesn't really... This notion that he has the same kind of code that we might expect from other characters, I don't know, that almost seems irrelevant to Marlo.
A key part of his character is making it clear that he's unhinged. And I think this is a very important step in that. And it is definitely one of the most extreme things he does in the show. But I enjoy it. I think it's, well, enjoy is a difficult word to put with it, but I think it's a good step. And it really does show the plane that Marlo thinks on. And it's not necessarily completely logical, but it is very sadistic and very, very egotistical. And yeah, I'm certainly a big fan of the way he took out his frustration with the card game on this more defenseless chap, and sort of the next chap that had a chance to disrespect him, or certainly a very provoked chance to disrespect him. So
he has a force of nature thing going on.
Yeah.
In the same way that the Deacon talks about drugs, sweeping leaves on a windy day, there is that sort of really unpredictable power to what Marlo does.
Definitely, and this scene made it very clear. So I think it was a very important part of building up Marlo. And of course gave us that fantastic
it wasn't
line.
like nobody was beneath him or above him in terms of people that could get got if they needed to be.
Yeah. All you have to do is disrespect me, or that's it. That's all that's required. It doesn't matter whether you do it physically or verbally, or whether you're provoked into it quite manipulatively. It's you're going. I am Marlo, and that's the end of it. So yeah, very, very powerful statement.
People are more of use to Marlo, and I guess he's far more interested in having that kind of brutality straight away with someone who is of no use to him in that sense.
Yeah.
Whereas someone like Michael, for example, who essentially somewhat disrespected him, he sees value in him. So that there's something to be gained there by holding back.
Mm.
But yeah, I think you could. It's understandable why it can be seen as being a bit of a random act, because it is compared to all the other hits. It is true that pretty much all the other hits have some kind of reason and something to gain, whereas here it is just a reputation thing. But it feels like a reminder of that, of Marlo and his. He is a bit of a psycho. Like, he's not there. He doesn't have that same kind of code that we have with other characters.
Definitely, yeah.
And similarly to us last week, Dan also talks more about the sound design and just echoing a lot of our sentiments really about how good it is and how good the sound design is, how it creates an authentic environment. And I agree when Dan says that it's unlike anything he's heard before in other TV shows. I do think it's a very unique show in how it sounds. And the way it builds tension with sound is very different because it can't rely on music in that same way. So it's a really, really interesting experience just listening to The Wire.
Oh, definitely, yeah. You get a really sort of big pair of speakers, and you hear all the little details in the background that someone's spent a lot of time putting in there. So yeah, very rewarding.
And Dan signs off by saying that he always enjoys Listener's Corner, and us discussing people's thoughts. And he says, thanks again for allowing us to contribute. It's greatly appreciated. Yeah, no problem at all. Anytime.
Yeah, cheers.
It adds so much to the show. So thanks for getting in contact, Dan. Let's move on
Dan.
to another long-time listener. Got a short email from Damon, who we've heard from quite a few times. And he chips in a little bit more here and says that it starts off with quite a boast. Are you ready for this? Damon begins by saying, I swear I've seen this show so many times and examining the themes, etc., so often that I consider myself one of the world's utmost authorities on it, or at least the world's top 10. That's quite a boast.
That's serious, that.
It's bold.
Some serious street knowledge.
I don't know. I'm not sure how you would measure a top 10 in the world on wire knowledge. I wouldn't consider... if there is a top 10, I'm not sure I would consider myself in that.
So you can have a look at the Omegle leaderboards.
Omegle?
Oh, Sporkle, not Omegle. Sporkle, there we go. Leaderboards for all the wire quizzes.
That's that's something you could measure, I suppose. Some of the questions in it are like pretty in depth as well. It's a pretty good quiz.
I guess that's the best possible way of quantifying it at this point. But yeah, there are some very, very detailed quizzes on there, so do check them out.
But he goes on to say, I should obviously add, goes on to say that they're listening to the podcast. There's still things that he never thought of. So we're not in the top 10, but we're in a sort of niche bottom 500. And he says, I always thought Marlo was just randomly asserting his power in that scene, referring to the you want it to be one way with the security guard. He says, I never thought to think it was maybe because he just lost the poker game. Do you think he may have stolen the lollipops anyway, though? Good food for thought. He also says that he drove to work and listened to the imitation of Snoop's sort of... not sure what it is. It's like a sort of a call to arms, isn't it?
Yeah,
like,
I think it's spelled Y-U-R-P when it's like written out. So whatever it is, it's some sort of crazy exclamation. Battle cry.
And he says that he proceeded to try and do it himself loudly by himself in the car. So I approve of that.
Definitely.
That's how you get good when no one else is around.
Definitely, yeah.
But yeah, thanks for getting in touch, Damon, and glad that we're still providing little bits here and there that maybe people haven't heard of, because people are always sending in emails to us doing the same thing, so it's just sharing all the knowledge on the wire. We'll all get to number 1 together.
Yeah.
Right, so that's Listener's Corner for this week. Thanks to everyone for getting in touch, and thanks to everyone who commented on that Reddit post that was on there as well. Some people saying some nice things on there, and if you do like the show, maybe obviously you can get in contact anytime, but it would also be really helpful if you maybe sent us like a rating on iTunes. I know you can like give it a star rating and write a little mini review, so if you feel like doing that, that would definitely help and get more people involved, and we can maybe build enough of an audience to have some even more in-depth conversations in Listener's Corner just in time for the podcast to finish, seeing as we are approaching the last 25% of the TV show.
Yeah,
now.
pretty much, yeah. Time's running out, so get your comments in, guys, and they'll be heard on the podcast.
Right, I think that's certainly about it for Listener's Corner. Is there anything else you want to bring up before we move into your recap?
Well, given the number of sections we have this episode, I think it's best if we jump straight in.
Okay.
Because the school particularly is a bumper 9 sections for one strand. And then, of course, we're going to jump in to see the politics, which is heating up before the election this week. We're then going to jump forward to, I think, our first ever joint strand, where the major case unit in the Western District combine their forces for one episode. So we're going to see both of those together. We're then going to go and spend a little bit of time with the Stanfields and a little bit more time with Homicide. And finally, we're going to have a little bit with Bubbles at the end. So most of that is going to be at the school. There's an awful lot of school stuff this week. And I know that in previous episodes, we've been sort of waiting for the last part of the podcast to speak about the school. And perhaps it loses something with that. So let's go straight in with the school at the top. we'll go with the opening scene. So, Dookie, Randy, Namond, Michael, Donut, and Kennard discuss Lex's disappearance in an alleyway at night. Namond asserts that Chris Partlow is turning his victims into zombies, and that Donut and Albert agree with him. Randy is distressed by the suggestion that Lex is a zombie, and is unable to completely convince himself that it's false. Michael believes that Chris must have some sway over his victims to convince them to enter a vacant building before he kills them. When a man walks up the alley toward them, the boys flee. So, that's our opening. And
Yeah, it's a good opening to the episode, I think. It's nice that we join all the boys together.
yeah, and really continuing those horror elements that we saw a little bit of in episode 1 of this season, with the sort of playground and the mystery surrounding Snoop and Chris. And again, we see that it's getting to the point now where Marlo's ascent has risen to the point where he has become this urban legend. He's made people superstitious, or voodoo as these guys call it. It's kind of, on the same level as Omar, in a kind of different way, in a slightly more real way. And he's incited a lot of fear into the Western District, and these kids can't even enjoy an evening without being, fearful of everything around them, and really, really developing this quite heavy sense of paranoia. So things are really, really getting dangerous.
I think what's particularly interesting about this scene is that we're kind of looking at a lot of it is about fear in a way, because obviously we see that they fear the unknown and the mysterious. We have this legend that you're talking about with Marlo, and like I think we've mentioned before that he's been talked about as if he's the boogeyman. Certainly Chris and Snoop talked about like that, and sort of having them, like you say, in that playground in silhouette and stepping out of the darkness, and it's all very sinister. But a lot of that comes from the unknown and how mysterious it is to them, and it feels like they don't want to even get close to that world because it's something they won't understand, and if they try to, they're just going to end up getting killed or worse, turned into a zombie, so they believe.
Yeah, and you've got to.
But
yeah,
only moments later, during that scene, they hear gunfire, don't they? There's like gunfire in the distance, and they barely react in comparison.
Yeah.
It almost seems like it's routine to them. like at one point, the police siren goes off as the car is going past, and the expression on their faces is almost like it's an annoyance.
Mm.
So they're afraid in the sense that they fear what's unknown and kind of the great unknown stuff that really scares them, but they have been ruined by the present dangers all around them, like all the gunfire and the crime, and those have become sources of fear that they've been numbed by.
It's a very, very good point. It really shows how you get used to.
It's just like it's a scene about fear for me.
Yeah, and it's weird that as you say, that the murder has moved from being very visible and very in the papers and in the media to being completely behind closed doors, literally. And no one could ever dream of what goes on in there, and no wonder all sorts of stories start emerging. So yeah, really, really nice to see that being communicated in the streets. It's an aspect of the show that they could have completely glossed over quite easily. But really, really, really nice to see it. And
it's nice that they comment on the likely caliber of the weapon being fired as well.
Yeah, which is another great comment on the whole education theme, and that these kids are experts in their own worlds. It's kind of crazy, isn't it, how Michael could identify the caliber stats of that gun, and therefore the type of person who's likely to be firing it. And he knew that it was no danger because it sounded like a weak gun, didn't it? Something like that. Just the way that these guys are in tune with their world is rather incredible, and it's so far removed from what we know. And we see later on that he can't begin to solve basic number problems on a small sheet in class. Like the caliber of knowledge is just considered something completely different.
Yeah, it all ties in brilliantly about how especially in the school world, it just doesn't really have anything to offer them.
Yeah.
And we're seeing what it is that they do know about here, so it's brilliantly done. If somebody fired a gun that close to me, I would do more than sort of turn my head and comment on, what the hell was that? Somebody just fired a gun.
It takes
get the hell out of here.
A friendly neighbourhood junkie to scare the guys off. Who, to be fair, does look kind of zombie-esque. They didn't just run away from no one, but it's certainly a different, more wary place now, as those bottles get smashed.
So yeah, it's a really good opening scene. And kind of ending with that zombie at the end, or supposed zombie.
Yeah, just a guy looking for his next fix. We assume really, but he has some.
Much like a zombie.
Yeah, I guess you could put it like that. And there's one final element to the scene, I guess, with Randy, who you can tell under the surface has this real panic regarding Lex still from quite a way back now, but obviously believing in this whole voodoo stuff would perhaps keep him off the hook mentally, in terms of believing that Lex isn't dead yet and that therefore he has no part in his death. So we see that's something that plays on his mind throughout the episode, and to no lesser extent here.
Mm.
Okay, anything else about this scene, or?
No, I think that's about it, really. I suppose it's kind of funny how seriously they're taking the ghost stories. It's like a sort of funny tragedy, you know?
Yeah, oh, definitely.
These kids and how innocent they are in one small sense and totally not in the other.
But I mean, in terms of the innocence lost as well, these streets already feel so much more dangerous than they were during summer at the start of the season. So, yeah, it's certainly a big shift already.
Yeah.
Let's go to the section 2 in the classroom now. So Prez is beginning. He's introducing new rules to his math classes. He offers them rewards for good behaviour, including stickers and a prize draw for his top 4 students. Students who disrupt the class will face an hour's detention. Naymond objects to the rules, but manages to talk Prez out of giving him a detention. Another student, Zenobia Dawson, expresses a desire to get stickers, but has no pencil. However, when Prez gives her his pencil, she throws it away and earns herself detention. Prez also gives Michael some detention when he refuses to attempt his work. Kareem spots Principal Donnelly searching bushes outside the school and alerts Naymond. Many other boys go to the window to watch. Naymond is annoyed when Donnelly finds and confiscates a knife he had concealed. Prez tries to get the boys to return to their work. When he finds that Naymond has not begun the task he set, he gives him detention. Naymond responds angrily and swears at Prez, who sends him to the office.
Yeah, a lot of detention being given out there.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's good that he's beginning to establish those rules, those motivations, those disciplines, and Naymond again and the rest of them really proving to be very good at arguing out of a bind. It seems to be a thing that they're kind of trained to do, and pick up on any whiff of foul play, which they can certainly do. You can't really catch these kids out. And Zenobia, who we haven't met yet, who becomes one of the more important characters at the school, becomes one of the corner kids in Bunny's class, sort of special class.
Yeah, we learn more about her as time goes on and get our first glimpse of the behaviour of, we ourselves are highlighting these corner kids that are likely to end up in Colvin's, little project. And it's an interesting decision from Prez when he says, when you're right, Naymond, you're right. It's this decision that in some way swings the class in his favour. It goes from something that they are not on board with at all to him kind of understanding the way that he must introduce these new rules to them. They make a good point about it's not fair if you're going to introduce the rules before we know about it and punish us, almost in a backdating kind of way. They haven't even caught up with the new rule system and they're being punished by it, which is a good point, really. So he makes a decision to concede, which works in his favour, and then is sadly followed by him being overly authoritarian and just dumping out a load of detention, and he ends up not even sticking to that because he lets them all go early. So
yeah, that's a bit of a...
It's not a shining example of Prez being a teacher here, but then, think what he's up against.
Definitely, yeah. No, it's good. I mean,
that is key to it, isn't it? It does feel like they're very much against one another. There isn't a sense of the teacher working with the students. It's like this constant conflict in the classroom.
Yeah, certainly an element of that. I think that they do show Prez settling down to some extent in this episode, particularly with the whole lunchtime thing. I mean, that's a bit of an alien concept to me. There was never any lunch in teachers' classrooms at my school, and the way they're all sort of set...
Oh, really? We had that.
But yeah, it's sort of them all settling down with their lunches in Prez. That there is some level of comfort with the guy, and that I think they do respond quite well to, as you say, when he does express that he can do justice and is willing to entertain their notions of justice. It does mean a lot to the kids, and I think that's a big step in them gaining respect for him.
I guess it's the so-called stoop kids, the ones that are actually trying hard and could do well if they were able to focus. They seem like the sort of kids that are probably hanging around in lunchtime with Prez there, so
That's true, yeah.
helping to highlight what can be achieved if those disruptive kids aren't in the classroom, just to trying to demonstrate one of the points being made by this new program that's being set up.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, Naaman, of course, wouldn't come near that place, would he, as he wasn't in that scene, so it does make sense that the quieter, more hungry to learn kids would go.
And Dookie's there, who is clearly of that type. I mean, in all of the scenes where there's, various bits of chaos going on in the classroom, like when they discover them, Miss Donnelly shaking the bushes and they will go over. Like, you can see during all of these scenes that Dookie is always there in the background working. He's always got his head down working. So it's just kind of emphasising that point that he is there just silently working in the background.
Yeah, no, very good.
It's good to maintain that.
Yeah, so good scene. I guess Naaman is the star of this show, really. He mentions that his blade has been got. I've never seen Naaman with a blade, but I guess he would carry one around for the cred, the street cred at least. And there's obviously that scene where Naaman and Prez face off fairly intensely, and both characters really step up to the pressure in those moments. And Prez isn't caught off guard. He does raise his voice to the extent where he really does shake it into Naaman and shows him what he is capable of. So I think both parties learn a lot there in that little altercation.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good scene.
Okay.
Move on to the next one then.
So we're going to see a bit of Bunny. So
does that bit include the bit where they come out into the hallway as well, or is that afterwards?
No, we're going to do that with Bunny. So we'll do that
with this
now.
one.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So Bunny discusses an initiative to target potential violent offenders in schools. He believes the students can be split into two broad groups: Stoop kids and corner kids. The Stoops are better parented at home and more ready to behave in class, while the corner kids are acclimated to life on the street, and continually disrupt classes. Colvin believes that by separating the two, both groups could do better. 8th grade head teacher Miss Sampson agrees with Colvin's assessment. Parenti, Colvin's academic colleague, points out that his idea is similar to tracking of students. Sampson confirms that tracking has a negative image because it suggests lowered expectations of certain groups of children, and it's contrary to the government's No Child Left Behind strategy. Sampson believes that the key is coming up with a program to benefit the corner kids. After the meeting, they encounter Naaman in the halls, and he swears at Parenti. Sampson subdues him with a word and hurries him along to the office for punishment.
So yeah, we learn a little bit about tracking in this scene from Parenti, about a nasty term in education circles, as he says. And Colvin is the uninitiated one. We see him kind of learning more about this more academic world that he's finding himself in, and he has very different ideals. It all seems unnecessary or ridiculous, like when he was signing those waivers, like he's still getting used to this. Like, why can't we just be honest and say these kids are at this level and these kids are at that level? And Miss Sampson and Parenti have to kind of explain it to him.
Definitely, yeah.
But then they explain it to us as well. We kind of get that information too. And it's nice that the show takes some steps to show interesting viewpoints on current affairs in its institutions, like it does with the newspaper, and it talks about the state of newspapers. It's not just it's a bunch of people at a newspaper. It's talking about the actual, real world situation of these kind of institutions. So it's one of the things that makes the show very culturally relevant. And
definitely, yeah, and it's really good.
One of the most key points in why it's so enjoyable.
Yeah, definitely, and I think that scene of exposition is a really good example of it, because it doesn't really feel like they're saying it for the audience's benefit, because Colvin is so much that sort of character that would be asking these questions that it feels completely natural, and in the process we learn without realizing. And it makes sense. Colvin has always been a man about the work, always been about the practicalities of the job. And again, it's another situation where he has to be disappointed and learn about these bureaucratic realities, and try and find a plan that does work within those. And he devises this plan very early. I forgot how early he does devise the plan to separate the kids again, a little bit like he did in Amsterdam with the separating the good and the bad. And of course, the Stoop kids getting to learn uninterrupted whilst the corner kids get to their independent study. And Colvin makes a very good, alluring point to Parenti that this is the whole original goal of the study, to isolate these troubled children and study them and learn some stuff about them. And I think that really does turn the tables for him there.
And we talked about this last week, about how the context of scenes is what makes them so valuable. And it's the same here with this bit where this scene is right next to where we're watching Prez handle one of the so-called corner kids and how it disrupts those who are actually working. You know, we're seeing those examples and those ideas side by side.
Yeah, that's really, really good. Yeah, definitely. So it's... And I guess Parenti as well, showing himself to be pretty underqualified. He seems to question, how would you identify the corner kids? Clearly a man who's never taught much. But yeah, as us as viewers, as you were saying earlier, we've already very clearly identified the corner kids in Prez's class. They're the only names that we'd know. They're the ones that cause all the trouble and, you know, gain all the attention.
Yeah.
So, not
and
quite
I really
up to
like at the end where we have Naaman coming out of the classroom, obviously having just rushed out from the telling off from Prez, decides to take out some of that frustration on Parenti, and is immediately met by Miss Sampson, and then obviously actually gets him to leave. I like Colvin's line, "Yeah, they do step up when you need them, don't they?" Not only is that a good line in itself, but he's stood right next to a sign reading "Quote of the Week" right next to him at head height.
That's great.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Really, really nice. And
there's literally at head height, it's just a big like orange sign saying "Quote of the Week."
It. Like, why is that not the epigraph? That would really complete it, wouldn't it?
Quote of the Week.
Yeah.
School banner.
Very nice spot. Annoyed that I didn't grab that myself. Yeah, I mean, I guess finally, as you were talking about the links between these scenes, it's great that sort of perfect timing, almost as if Naaman's announcing himself as that first candidate for this class, and sort of getting it underway. So yeah, very, very good.
Right.
Let's go and see what's going on in the detentions. So Prez's detention is packed with students that misbehaved, including Zenobia and Albert Stokes, but Michael is conspicuously absent. Eventually, Prez relents the pressure from the students and lets them leave early. Randy, Dookie and Naaman return to the classroom and Naaman apologizes for his actions, explaining that he feels unable to control himself. Prez learns that Naaman has been suspended. Prez gives Dookie a bag of clothes and toiletries. Randy notices Michael's name circled on Prez's detention register and tries to explain that he cannot make detention because he has to collect Bug, his brother, from school, because of their mother's addiction. Prez leaves the school with Dookie and Randy, and they see Donut on their way out. Donut's awaiting a colleague who's detention with Miss Sampson, and explains that she never lets the students out of detention early. Prez cannot find his keys, and Dookie spots them in his car. Randy has Donut break into the car for Prez, and Donut makes short work of the job.
Right, so we I suppose we start with a little bit of Dookie's friendship with Randy, I suppose. Obviously, Prez asks if Randy could leave, because obviously he's doing his bit for Dookie and doesn't realise that it's okay that he can stay. So we kind of start with that little bit of reinforcement of the relationship between the two of them and the trust that they have. And we see Prez, you know, he's got those soft eyes that he was told to have. He's been able to realise certain situations without necessarily having all of the facts, and he knows that he needs to provide for a kid like Dookie's in very hard circumstances. But he also begins to learn that there's no point in him keeping it a secret from the other kids because they all already know. It's no mystery to them.
And no one's heartless enough to really claim it's an unfair practice at all. Like, the other kids get it completely. So yeah, that's a really nice detail. As we mentioned before, Prez really does make a mistake by going soft on that detention. And I think he begins to understand the gravity of that when Donut explains how Miss Sampson runs her detentions, and the fact that she does make those personal sacrifices to run a full hour-long detention, we imagine, at the expense of her own evening and going home to whoever she goes home to. And I'm sure Prez had that in his mind when he was like, this is my first one, let's let it go, and then later on I'll be a good full detention teacher. And obviously that's a slippery slope. It's very hard to actually commit to that. And again, he's just learning more and more about what it really takes to become this teacher, this authority figure that he needs to establish himself as. Yeah,
absolutely. He's still got a lot to learn, and this is a bit of a rash act that doesn't do him too well. And it almost feels like the having left his keys in the car is the payback in a way.
Yeah, and Dookie is incredibly good at, very observant at spotting those keys before we even know they're lost. He seems to just sort of pump them right out. So
Yeah. And of course, Donut is reading Rides when he's sat on the step. Just kind of constantly. I mean, don't get too much time with him for much of a character to be developed. So instead, we're just getting that constant reminder of Donut and cars.
yeah, I mean, he's not quite a three-dimensional character, this one, but he's always entertaining.
Obviously, very capable of getting Prez's car open. In a way, this is actually one of the funniest scenes in the whole show for me. Just Donut's face and Prez's reaction. It's totally ridiculous, and yet I believed it because of everything that I've been shown so far, because of these characters.
Yeah. We've already seen him steal a couple of cars. It feels very natural. If only a tiny bit forced, and again, it's just a great learning curve for Prez yet again. Like the look of disbelief on him, and the concept that that this boy is here and he's capable of causing some real crime if he wants to. But in this situation, it's being used for good, and again, it's just a really, really good scene to see Prez react to.
Yeah, Donut's like, no problem, Chief, or something like that.
Yeah, it's just hilarious, really, isn't it? And really, really adds a lot to those carjacking scenes we've seen already, which were pretty hard to believe actually to begin with. But I think this scene does add a lot to them.
Obviously, a very crappy locking system on those cars.
Does that work? I've never really seen anything else that suggests that that's a good way to carjack. Just shove a piece of metal down the sort of gap in the car door. But
well, I can't think of any time where I've ever considered stealing a car.
No, but
it's really difficult to really come up with any ways how to do it.
Just wondering if it's good education if that thought does cross your mind, but maybe it's
so
not.
You're saying The Wire might be advertising ways of actually breaking into cars?
Potentially.
I don't know. Could work. Far too civilized to do anything like that.
Of course.
But so that's kind of that bit. Prez manages to benefit from this, I suppose, somewhat shady knowledge that Donut has.
Definitely, yeah.
And also, I guess there's an extra element. What with him, used to be a policeman. I guess he doesn't have that same desire to uphold the law in the same way that Colvin did when he was outside the police. He kind of wanted to continue those values on, whereas Prez accepts that there's obviously in his situation he has something to gain there. Definitely,
and I think it's worth mentioning that the way Prez reacts to things at this school does not suggest that he's been a policeman in his previous career. Kind of exposing what he really was in that unit, that he was a very valuable asset, but not in a conventional way. And it is just a demonstration that there is this teaching going between both the students and the teachers. And in many cases, it's Prez who actually learns far more, particularly when they're discussing Michael and his situation at home, which he at first dismisses quite coldly as, whatever, he'll find a way to do it. And then I think he's hit quite heavily by Dookie, particularly explaining the realities. Dookie's not a man who would tell fibs. And it seems to get under his skin. His heart starts going out for all these kids.
Yeah, he just kind of... It's nice that his relationship with them, like, he already tries to adopt that relationship right from the start, like after the incident with... is it Letitia?
Yes, that's right. With the
after that incident, he's already like, I've got to say something to these kids. Like, it's very, very serious about having that kind of I don't know. I'm not really sure how to describe it. To be honest,
empathy and acting.
But it's
on the empathy.
In a simple sense, it's just kind of empathy and that compassion for the kids. But there's something parental about the whole thing, especially seeing as many of these kids have not had any of that kind of input.
Yeah, and later on it's actually Donnelly who explains that that's very much a rookie teacher's thing, that as painful as it is, teachers will shake that after a while because it gets to a stage where you are literally having to help all these kids. And these kids are all from very troubled backgrounds, and the only way to do it really is to not help anyone, as painful as that is.
I mean, he actually has the whole birds and the bees talk at one point, doesn't he?
Definitely, yeah. And
he's talking about when he's like, sometimes you might like to tickle your partner.
yeah,
tickle my nuts.
It's true, yeah.
Which is exactly what a kid would say in that situation. It's just perfect.
Oh,
But that's
dear
later.
God,
later.
yeah, I'm looking
Not
forward to
not
that.
even in this episode.
Oh, I forgot about that one completely. I mean, just before we move on, let's quickly mention the Namond bit as well. He comes in to apologise.
Yeah.
Feels like a very genuine apology. There's nothing sarcastic about it, from the way I interpreted it anyway. And he refers to
It's
this...
the evil gets
Yeah,
in
the
him.
evil. Which is an interesting concept, kind of similar to that voodoo they were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
But yeah, fair enough, Namond. All four of the boys really show a very warm side to them this episode.
When you're right, Namond, you're right.
Yeah, and straight out of the tautology supercut, I'm sure.
Exactly, yeah. If you're with us, you're with us.
Yeah, school is school.
Just like we be with you. It does, the Wire does love its tautologies.
Yeah.
So, let's move on to the next
So we're
bit
about
then.
halfway through the school stuff. So now Randy catches up with Namond and Michael in the evening. Chris and Snoop also find Michael and send the others away so they can talk to him. Chris offers Michael a position with the Stanford organisation as a soldier. Michael turns the offer down because of his family, but Chris gives him cash and asks him to consider it anyway. Michael returns to his friends. Randy is anxious, believing that Chris is asking him about him because of his knowledge of Lex's death.
Yeah, it's... I guess I'll jump straight into the actual conversation that they have with Michael and say that it's nice how the money is forced into Michael's hand this time. There's no opportunity for him to turn it down. And knowing what we know happens with his relationship with them, it's like it's his first paycheck in advance. You know, he's kind of taken that money and he's already accepted by taking it. And he's not been given a choice. That's been made very clear. Like, he does not have a choice. They're asking him to think about it, but they're not really.
Yeah, and it looks like a real hefty sum as well. There's no 200 handout that time. So there's a lot of money he already owes to that organisation, which is not a good position to be in, despite the warm chat that Chris gives them. You know, if you're with us, you're with us. We'll look after you like one of our own. It's family with us. Very, very mixed message for Michael to hear. When he's lived in a world that's really not had any of that at all, really. So, yeah.
It's under the spell. It's under the voodoo spell.
Definitely. And
it goes back to the other kids, and they share a nice moment there. Randy, his paranoia over getting caught in any way whatsoever really shines through. It's a really good performance, actually. Really, really good performance. And obviously they have a little joke at his expense as a result.
yeah, which is very, very harsh in Randy's situation, but obviously they know nothing about Randy's predicament at this point. Randy only reveals it to Dookie later on, so it makes sense. But yeah, Randy, really, really feel for him here in this situation. Yeah, so pretty good scene. Again, kind of continuing that horror movie scene from earlier. Chris and Snoop very obviously playing a good cop, bad cop routine to lure the Michael in. And unlike the good cop, bad cop scene in season 1, which I think is the only other one we've seen, Michael's really not as smart as Bodie and can't call them out on it. And Chris and Snoop are far more competent than Herc and Carver were. So really good to kind of point out those differences.
And I do like that final shot on Randy alone looking down the alleyway. Something very foreboding about that. Yeah.
And I think the parting comment they make as well is very foreboding. They say something along the lines of, "When you need us, come find us," something like that. And I don't know if they can foresee him needing their assistance. They obviously know he's a troubled kid, and Chris and Snoop are offering a unique service which he does eventually need. He has, you know, as many trust issues, or too many trust issues to go to anyone else with this problem. And it almost feels like they know that with their weird voodoo powers. Maybe they do, maybe they know more about Michael than we expect because of all of Chris's observant watching, but there is something very, very sinister about that. And of course, as they predicted, he will come crawling for them later on.
I suppose they don't have too much to lose either, because if Michael decides never to actually approach them, I mean, like I say, I don't really feel like they are asking Tim to think about it. They are giving him a very clear sort of course of action to follow. But But assuming that Michael were to kind of continue and just take the money, like at the end of the day, they've lost a bit of money, which is obviously like water to them.
Yeah.
So, maybe, they must be pretty certain that Michael's not going to say to anyone to anything that's going to get them in any trouble, which obviously he's not. So, they lose nothing if it doesn't go their way. They're just making a stab at someone that they think is useful to them, as they mention in that little speech that they deliver. So, yeah, I guess they don't have anything to lose. So,
yeah,
they just go for it.
That's one way of looking at it. I think that equally you could say that there's a confidence in the way that they're not actually going back to Michael, going back to the well, and they believe that it's a matter of time before he will come and seek them. And Marlo's the kind of guy that wouldn't settle for something that he can't have. He would find a way to get it. And maybe that's not the way it goes, but that there's some sort of eerie confidence to the way they just wait for him to come into their net at some point. Yeah,
they certainly seem very certain about it, and that's why, I really don't think he has a choice really. But yeah, sort of an interesting little speech that they deliver, and filled with a surprising amount of quite comforting language, dare I say, coming from someone, coming from the biggest murderer in the whole show.
With his country-ass clothes.
It's got a very, very sinister undertone to it, and as well it might.
Definitely. And of course, finally, Namond takes a very brave stand in letting Snoop know about her sister, who's in the class. And of course, I don't think we've seen her yet in this season, but she does turn up. Not that she's ever credited as Snoop's sister, but she is modelled very much on her. Just looks like a younger version, so we'll point her out next time we see her in the classroom. But that's a very nice link that they sort of subtly draw on here.
All right, ready for the next section?
Yep, okay, so another short section here. So the next day, Prez meets with Michael in his lunch break and appeals to him to talk to him if he's unable to make detention. Prez gives Dookie some of his lunch again and a hall pass and change to get something to drink. When Dookie leaves the room, Prez checks with Crystal about Dookie because he's not wearing the new clothes he gave him. She tells Prez that his family steal his possessions and sell them for drug money.
I suppose this bit ties into what we were talking about earlier about how Prez, he doesn't. There's no point in him. He discovers there's no point hiding any of that information about what's going on with Dookie because all of the other kids already know, and as you say, nobody speaks out about it being unfair. They understand that he needs that support. So yeah, we kind of already covered a few of the bits about that, really.
Yeah, and I guess we see another moment where Michael is again challenged to do what he fears the most, and that's speaking out about his worries following years of abuse and the resulting mistrust of authority figures. Or certainly the show never explicitly mentions that, but it's very much a kind of an assumed thing or a suggested thing. And we saw that, of course, with Cutty last episode, and we're seeing it again now with Prez. There's clearly a lot going on under the surface, but he's just not in a position to trust these authority figures, particularly these male authority figures. Yeah. And of course, further kind of involvement with Dookie. And Dookie is almost confused by this kindness. I like the way he reacts to the sandwich.
Yeah, absolutely.
We assume he's not really been exposed to much of this selfless kindness in his life, and it's a really, really weird concept for him, and he plays that very well.
Yeah, there's a real gratitude being shown here, and like you say, not something that he's accustomed to, so very endearing of Prez as well to make that decision, and ties into what sadly is a bit of a rookie mistake based on getting attached to the kids, and how when they leave he's going to have to do it all again with another completely different bunch of kids.
Yeah.
But I guess he can afford to make these kind of steps now. This is the right time. It is his turn to give a fuck, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be a learning curve if he wasn't doing this stuff, so yeah, all good character building stuff.
Let's move on to the next bit then.
Alright, so back to Colvin for a little bit. So Colvin's meeting with the principal, Claudel Withers, we haven't seen him for a while, discussing the planned initiative. Withers offers them his support, but is quickly drawn away to meet with parents whose children are bringing an argument between their families into the school. Donnelly urges Colvin to protect Withers, as any fallout from their initiative will reflect poorly on him. Donnelly suggests that Colvin and Parenti begin with 10 children. Randy continues to sell candy to other students, cutting class to do so. He's asked by Manel another 8th grade student to keep watch in the hallway while he and his friend Paul fool around with a girl named Tiff in a bathroom. Randy is reluctant but accepts money to do so.
Yeah, so starting off with the bit where Principal Withers goes out on a limb for them and, the board know how to use a chainsaw or something.
Yeah, which is
a nice line.
Again, something that Parenti just goes right over his head despite being the academic, and something that Colvin is obviously quite accustomed to now, having really been on the horrible receiving end of a similar problem.
Yeah, Parenti is quite an odd character sometimes because he is supposed to be the smart academic one, but he also seems quite clueless a lot of the time in the actual school situation. I suppose this is meant to demonstrate that as an academic, he's had a lot of time looking at theories and reading, but actual real-world experience is lacking. And I understand, obviously, that's an interesting point being made with the character, especially in comparison to, like you say, with Colvin. He knows what's being talked about. He's experienced that kind of, dare I call it, leadership style. Yeah. So I guess they're showing that, but sometimes it does make Parenti's character a bit strange. I feel like he should be a little bit more switched on sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sure that they love to make the point that these academics are, when it comes down to it, really switched off. So it's certainly succeeding in that.
Come to do good, stay to do well.
Oh yeah. Colvin's point is being proven, if that's what he wants. Yeah. So.
And they think that 40 is workable.
Yeah.
Which is a bit of ignorance on both their parts.
It's again, isn't it? It's the whole.
Seems very funny to Donnelly.
Keep lowering your expectations, and you'll eventually get somewhere. Obviously, we saw that with the ages to begin with, and now the class sizes again. So.
Yeah, they're starting very high each time, having to be dragged back down to a more realistic level on each occasion, which is nice.
Yeah. So yeah.
I guess it happens once they actually get into the classroom as well.
Yeah, as we'll see. And we get a nice thank you from Claude Withers. Again,
it won't be very often that you hear that from people in the system.
Certainly, and there's a bit of a crossover with the whole Dookie being confused by the gratitude thing. It's a very unusual occurrence in this system, as is pointed out by Donnelly. So
yeah, that's a good point.
And drawing, of course, parallels with Burrell, particularly any problems will be accountable to the principal, so he really is going out on a limb without knowing much at all about what they're doing. And, yeah. Anything to say about the Randy stuff?
So we have Randy having to put himself in another position where he becomes a holder of somewhat confidential information. This is a very unwise choice to do this, but at the same time, I guess he wants to reinforce the fact that he's not a snitch and that he is capable of being entrusted with these kind of tasks, which seems like quite a random task, and it actually ends up turning into a very serious situation indeed that we find out. And I mean, it's already pretty serious to begin with, the fact that he's being paid off so that these kids can go into the bathroom and it's not really clear exactly what they're doing, but I think you can use your imagination.
Oh yeah. This is, as you mentioned, this is the stepping stone event between him, being where he is now, anonymous, and being called out for a snitch.
Yeah, this is like where he becomes infamous as a snitch.
Yeah, so it's a really unfortunate situation. Again, not innocent on the face of it, but certainly, not an important moment in the show on the face of it, as a lot of these things aren't.
Yep.
And he's very quick to mention to Bunny as he passes by that he has a hall pass.
Yeah, very complete lack of subtlety there.
Yep. Okay. Couple more school bits and we're done. So we're going to go see Namond and Weebay for a little bit. So Namond visits his father Weebay in prison with his mother Delonda. Delonda wants Weebay to talk to Namond about his suspension. Weebay ends up talking to his son about the days of the Barksdale organisation and how Marlo would be dead for breaking the rules if he was still on the streets with his family of drug dealers.
Yeah, and by this point, we've actually, in terms of the chronology of the episode itself, by this point we've seen Bunk and Lester out in Leakin Park, and it's nice that Weebay mentions it there as this, almost like this artifact, this act of old days, back when the streets were very different and people couldn't act in the same way that Marlo does now, and just tying it all together very nicely.
Yeah, definitely. Showing how outdated Freeman's idea is, that it's this thing of the past, and Weebay certainly advertises it as such. And I think Weebay refers to it again in season 1 when he's giving up the murders, just to do them, just to give the murders for the life sentence. He explains how some of the bodies are hidden up in Leakin Park. I haven't gone back and checked myself, so I might just have to confirm that next week, but that would be really cool if that kind of comes back from there.
Oh, definitely. Seems like that sort of thing that you might expect.
Yeah, definitely. He sort of draws some sort of comparison between Naaman's suspension from school and Marlo's changing of the rules of the game, and how it's totally unacceptable. But because he has got into that position where he has the ultimate power, there's nothing that can be done about it now. It's just become the new system. And give it, if he were in power for 10, 20 years, no one would know any better. Just sort of almost longing for those days of respect, or relative respect at least, that he saw under Avon.
Stay strong is about the best that he can offer, really.
Yeah. And
Much like he's dealing with himself. He's in prison now, just has to stay strong, stick to that idea. You only do 2 days. You have to deal with the situation that you're in.
definitely. And Naaman very naively does have the heart to step up, like his dad. And even Weebay knows that Bodhi made the right call by stepping down from that corner, despite the fact that Naaman suggests that he'd do better than him, he'd stand his ground stronger.
Yeah, he's smart enough to know that even without having seen it, that Bodhi's making the right move.
Yeah, definitely. It was quite impressive because obviously I don't think Marlo and Weebay have ever met, but he must have a fairly good ear to the street, we imagine, Weebay. Yeah.
Well, it's probably kept up to date, I would have thought.
Yeah, I'd have thought so.
Especially when we see him having those long conversations later on with Delonda on the phone.
Yeah, which does make it even weirder.
She probably tells him enough.
Yeah, I mean, burying, sort of digging up old graves here, but it makes it even stranger that Avon never found out about the Prop Joe alliance in season 2 until he was told. Yeah.
Is there anything left for the school then?
Yep, one more bit, and it's actually the final scene of the episode. So, after school, Randy talks to Dookie about his fears of Chris coming for him. He confesses to Dookie his role in Lex's murder. Dookie tries to convince Randy that Chris is simply murdering his victims in the vacants. Dookie backs up his claim by telling Randy that he saw one victim killed from his bedroom window. Dookie takes Michael and Randy to one of the vacant buildings Chris has used. He shows them a body interred there, and Randy is forced to face up to Chris's victims being truly dead.
Yeah, so Randy and Dookie sharing their confessions. That's kind of how it begins.
Yeah, and Dookie is the one kid that I would probably share my confession with. He seems like the most trustworthy and the most understanding of the kids.
Yeah. And continuing on something that we haven't seen as much, I suppose, other than very early on in the season. But we were shown that Dookie's very astute. He's the watcher. He sees many things. Kind of, again, we talked about that building him up into the Bubbles role of being the person who is about, but not necessarily visible. And he's obviously noticed this killing outside his bedroom window. So, it's interesting that he leads them to it, and that, it's pretty incredible that they go and unveil this decomposed body. Really,
Yeah, definitely. And this is the height of the Wire horror movie mini series. Essentially, this is also the end of it, because obviously the spell is now broken. There's no voodoo shit. Everyone knows. No special dead. And it's relief for most of them that the zombie thing is a lie, and ironically for Randy, it's the other way around. As he realizes that he will have to face up to the fact that he arguably did have a role in this death. So, certainly mixed feelings for this scene. Really, really good finish.
Yeah, it's nice to kind of start with those horror themes and end with them nicely. And like you say, I think breaking the spell is a good way to put it. Like, that is very much what it is. And for some, that's a relief, and for Randy, it's not. It indicts more terror. Yeah,
and I do like the way they end with this. There's something sort of sobering and innocence losing about the breaking of this spell. Just sort of sending us further down that path into the hell that these kids are going towards. And they're almost sort of discovering that there's no magic in the world, almost sort of the Father Christmas isn't real thing, and so yeah, nice allusion to the start of the fall.
Yeah, the torch going out and everything, like.
It's all pretty damn foreboding.
Yeah, it's a very kind of classic horror movie cliches in a way, but just being reappropriated somehow. It works. Even though it's a horrible cliche, it kind of works. It does build up a bit of an homage to horror, and you're safe in the knowledge that that's not what it's trying to do.
No, definitely. And I guess it's the 5th episode in a row to end on a close-up of one of the kids. We're back to Randy again this time.
Yeah.
Again, he's contemplating the murder of Lex, as he was the very first time we saw his face at the end of episode 1, but I think he's possibly in a little bit more pain than he was even then now.
Yeah, even greater realisation.
Yeah. All right.
So that's the school.
That's the school. Sorry about that. That's a huge strand. So politics is the second largest strand, and there's going to be 5 sections to that. 2 of them are fairly large, so let's get that out of the way. So Major Stan Valchek visits Carcetti at his campaign offices. He gives Carcetti the news of Detective Norris being reassigned from the murdered witness case and replaced with rookie Kima Greggs. After Valchek leaves, he discusses how to use the information with Norman Wilson and Teresa D'Agostino. Wilson suggests giving the story to Councilman Tony Gray to allow him to press the mayor over the witness case and draw off more of his votes.
Right, so Valchek, who is a piece of work, as Wilson says. Valchek is just this man completely lacking the self-awareness to have any tact that might, obscure his casual sexism. He's like abroad, no less. It's like out of some ridiculous 1940s crime drama.
Oh yeah.
But there he is. He's actually providing something incredibly useful. So Terry's reaction is muted, given what he's offering them. But a piece of work. Definitely.
Definitely. Yeah, there's no hiding how messed up he is, and just a massive exposure of how unfortunate it is in many ways for Burrell. I mean, we keep talking about how we feel sorry for Burrell, but yet again, like quite a legitimate attempt at slowing the case down has really gone amiss, and the department really does have a few holes. It's leaking like a sieve, and it's making doing anything under the secrecy cover very difficult. We can only guess that it's going to end very badly for Burrell now that this has got out as well.
Yeah, and we then have this very large pause in this scene. Before that, we have Carcetti's very, very quick wit, where he says there's no spin on a knuckleball, but you still can't tell how it's going to break.
Yeah, which is a really nice point.
It's very kind of very poetic, and we get a very big pregnant pause, and then the response, we give it to Tony Gray. Shout out for Wilson here, who is really good. He's very devious, and he has just that incredible voice. Just can't forget the voice.
I'm a devious motherfucker once I get going. Yeah, it's just serious gravel to the voice. I love it. Really nice moment, and this is a really good scene at conveying how much behind the scenes manipulation can go on with politics, and it's kind of a pull back the curtain moment for many. Like, it makes so much sense, but you'd never consider that if you were kind of just on the outside watching these debates, how much puppetry goes on behind the scenes. So really, really nice moment at putting that across.
Yeah, we're just seeing all the machinations of the politics, which is a great insight.
And it does seem morally reprehensible in the moment when you hear him say it, but then you consider how messed up Royce's current administration has been and is, and it makes everything grey again. So The Wire doing what it does best, really making you think.
Small fry in comparison.
Yeah. So it's very, very good at mixing things up and not making things very clear at all. And Carcetti does make a good call. The original witness slant did seem kind of exploitive at the time. He got away with it, but will he get away with it again? It does seem a bit stretchy, so it does make sense to find another solution here.
Yeah. So it's a very good move.
Yeah,
pays off.
Definitely. Just quickly mention as well. Funny enough, Valchek also meddled with Burrell's appointment as commissioner in season 2. because he sort of controlled the smoothness of his ascent. He guaranteed it by making him a pointer Sabotka detail. And of course, he's now a very active part in his downfall, leaking all the things that Burrell needs to keep under wraps under the chain of command. So
Yeah, he's no love lost between them.
nope.
I don't think. And Valchek is making sure that he gets his revenge.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, he's got no qualms this one.
No reason to try and protect Burrell in any way.
No, he's just playing the game. That's how he sees it. Okay. All right. Anything else to say for that, or should we?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. So now we go to Royce for a bit. So Mayor Royce shaves off his beard, hoping that a return to the image he wore when he first got elected will improve his polling. Royce's chief of staff, Colvin Parker, is impressed with the change of image. Meanwhile, Carcetti campaigns hard, giving out flyers in the early morning. Wilson reports that Gray has accepted their offer for a meeting. Wilson takes the meeting with Gray. Gray sees through their motives for giving him the information, but decides to use it regardless, knowing that it will help him as well. Wilson tells Gray that at this point he cannot hope to win, and should consider reconciling with Carcetti and gearing up for another position.
Yeah, so Royce is busy caring about how he looks, whilst Carcetti is actually out hitting the bricks, and that in itself gives us the definition between the two of them.
Yeah.
Royce is still trying to play this image game. He's still trying to desperately claw back how he's perceived and, I don't know, almost reclaim some kind of glory days. Like he's shaving off this beard and Colin Parker's like, oh, you look just like you did when you... Whenever he makes some kind of comment to some success in the past. Yeah, exactly. So he's just playing a very short-sighted game, and meanwhile Carcetti is actually out there doing the real work.
Yeah, and the way they cut those scenes makes it very clear that they're drawing that comparison. I think the show makes it ambiguous as to whether Royce is confident. He has an inflated sense of confidence about the fact that he can still win, or whether it's very much a desperate thing and that he's almost too scared to now go back out on the street. I'm probably more inclined to go in the latter camp, but I think there have been arguments made for the first one, that he's still very much a bit delusional at this stage about his confidence and his power in the city. Obviously,
I don't know, I see a look of fear in his eyes.
Yeah.
When he's shaving there, I don't see a man of complete confidence.
No.
He's trying to convince himself that he is confident about it. It's a bit strange like that, but no, I see a bit of a look of fear in his eyes.
Yeah.
And fear is quite a common theme in this episode, it seems.
That is true. And certainly good to see. And what else have we got here, really? Tommy is in one of his neighbourhoods there in the first, and Norman gives him very little time in this white neighbourhood, as they're very confident in the voting intentions of this base here. So they just... It's
demonstrated very quickly that everyone there is quite happy to see him and speak to him, and oh, you've got my vote, and they don't need to spend a lot of time here.
Yeah, so they go right back to the west side where they need to spend the lion's share of the time sort of switching people's votes. So it makes a lot of sense, eating to Royce's base.
And then they go and see Tony Gray, and it's nice that he's already figured out exactly what they're doing there, but he also has to deal he also has to deal with the knowledge that Wilson is right when he tells him that he's not going to win, but that using this information is going to be good for him, and he should be thinking about something a bit further down the line rather than just immediately trying to grab something that is essentially hopeless.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, I mean, Tony Gray very powerless, yeah, and I'm sure he'd love not to help Tony out, get back at Tony, but he is trapped by those with the power. Royce still has a waning chance. I guess Tony is resigned to that loss already, but Norman is very good at pressing all the buttons he needs to and proving to be a great campaign asset, as he's really manipulating and appealing to Tony's biggest fears, that he won't really matter after the election at all. At least with a few more votes, you could perhaps credibly stand for a higher position in the council.
That's right. So makes the decision to use it anyway.
Yep. So there we go. And I guess if he didn't use it, then Tommy would have had to have used it himself, which could have backfired. may still get away with it. But yeah, it's nice that obviously for them it was a bit more plain sailing than they'd hoped.
Right, on to the next section then.
Yeah. Okay. So, Royce has a strategy meeting but is interrupted by Parker, who has noticed the media reporting on the witness story. Royce angrily confronts Irvin Burrell about this new problem from his department. Royce lists Burrell's problems and berates him for his overzealous efforts to slow the witness case. Royce tells Burrell to get out of his office. With Burrell gone, Royce questions his deputy commissioner, Rawls. Rawls claims that he's loyal to Burrell, but knew he was making a mistake. He tells Royce that he could handle the pressure of Burrell's position. Royce then asks Rawls to make this incident go away, claiming he won't forget what Rawls has done. It's assumed by this statement that Royce is ready to name Rawls the Baltimore Police Department Commissioner following the election.
Yeah, so Burrell, really gets it this time to the extent that he is essentially dismissed. And Rawls does very well to play the loyalty card. He's very good at appearing loyal to everyone. Does really well in this episode of essentially managing to make allies of whoever wins the election. Because later on he's makes friends with Carcetti as well, so he does very well here. But Burrell not so much. Burrell gets it very tough, and I don't know why, but I still can't help but feel strangely a little bit sad for him, even though he is he is a massive arse. Like, I just can't help but feel a little bit sorry for him in the way that he just gets totally chewed out by Royce here.
Oh, definitely, yeah. No, he's just so many times. We've seen him get shat on so many times, really. That is he a bad man anymore? I mean, we always see him doing shady things, but that's completely a result of the pressure he's under. As Rawls says, in many ways, he was completely telling the truth there. So I am very torn on Burrell. I think he's a very interesting, murky character in terms of his morality.
And yeah, I do quite like how Royce reacts here, though. I think it's there's something about the performance and the delivery of some of these lines which has such gravity to him. It's like, that would be Commissioner.
Yeah.
Like, it's really like there's something very hefty about that.
Yeah, and he really does underline every word, doesn't he? And he really puts a lot into each of those 4 big mess-ups that Burrell did, so none of which were in his control, of course. Amsterdam was the first one, then the subpoenas, then the witness angle, and now the detective transfer. And in every case he gets the blame, in every case he had no control over it. So he's clearly laying on those lines thick in a very theatrical way to make his point very clear that, sorry, you've lost, and you're in a very powerless position despite the fact that you are the commissioner.
Yeah. Well, he wants to keep feeling like the man with the power, does Royce.
Yeah.
So it's understandable that he's going to let a lot of it out here, because it might be one of the last chances that he gets to really wield that kind of power.
Definitely, yeah. And of course, following this, it's very sneaky how Rawls is then in a position where he can spin everything in his favour, as he's not in a position to take that responsibility in the same way Burrell was. So I think the show has really shifted from showing us how it's the people at the bottom of the chain that can get crapped on from those above, and it's now showing us more of how, if anything, it's actually more treacherous the higher you climb, and that's all to do with the media. The higher up you are, the closer to the media's interest you will be, and then all of a sudden, all the crapping at the lower echelons seems justified. You have to do that to stay protected from that kind of potential shitstorm that comes with the media.
Yeah, you become very much a person of interest.
Yeah.
And you have to, much like how the principal Withers, he has to kind of take the flak for what they're doing with Colvin and Parenti, because they're not people of interest particularly. If it falls on them, then it's not a particularly big deal. But if it falls on the actual representative and the actual principal of the school, then that's a person of interest. That's a story to be had there.
Definitely, yeah. So there we go. I don't know if we mentioned the whole news is on cliche was used again when what's his face turned the TV on Coleman Parker.
Yeah, exactly. They always manage to turn the TV on right at the perfect moment where the exactly what we need to hear is being said.
And he even changed
so-
channels to get different takes on it at the precise correct
Yeah.
moments. So, yeah.
It's all on all 12 channels, you know.
Yeah.
So it's even the Wire doesn't manage to avoid that, but
No.
you know, fair enough, I guess.
When you have so much to cram into 58 minutes, I guess that was what had to get short shrifted potentially.
It's one of those things that's there, like, because you're not actually going to sit there and have them be like, wait, oh, it's coming in a minute. You know, that doesn't make very good TV. There's like we have to watch a commercial break in the actual show
I
itself.
don't know, they could have had the whole Burrell berating chat while they're waiting for it, and then they get interrupted to watch the news story. But I guess it needs to have the hindsight of that news story already to have more power in that speech. So
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Should
Yeah, let's move on.
All right, 2 more politics sections. They are pretty large, so bear with us. Royce then is seen drinking whiskey in his office during a meeting with Delegate Watkins, stating that he will sack Burrell after the election. Watkins tells Royce that he is to blame for Burrell's actions, having told him to slow the case down. Royce argues about what he meant, while Watkins points out what he witnessed. Watkins states that no one can really tell what Royce means anymore, confronting Royce with his own campaign material, showing support for both Marlo and Unetta Perkins. He tells Royce that he has broken his word to support Daniels as Royce pleads ignorance, claiming someone else printed the Perkins tickets. Watkins furthermore is disgusted with Royce, claiming Royce is in bed with every property developer and corrupt politician like Clay Davis, exemplified by Royce's secret poker games that are funding his campaign. Watkins also accuses him of forgetting where he came from, as Watkins believes Royce does not truly care about Baltimore's majority African-American community and is merely trying to win their votes with black pride flags and Marcus Garvey posters. Watkins then leaves, promising to withdraw his support of the mayor as Royce threatens him following the election. Parker sees the importance of Watkins' support and urges Royce to chase after him as Royce drunkenly and pridefully refuses to apologise. Lieutenant Hoskins of the mayor's security detail notices this and phones Rawls with the information.
All right, so a rare moment in The Wire where a character gets their comeuppance. And we do see another example of this later on, but we'll get to that. But this is one of them where Royce, you know, his pride and his... and there's an extravagance to him in this scene as well with his whiskey, and you know, Adele ends up jumping ship because of his actions. And it's nice that this is brought up, the fact that there is this promise that he makes to Odell, and you know, he remembers that, and it's nice that this, you know, somewhat minor mention of something that he pledges to do carries on into a whole arc with this character, and he ends up losing very important support as a result, and this is one of the key factors that loses in the election as a whole.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Yeah, breaking out that whiskey, I'm not sure if it's a smooth thing or a dangerous thing, but yeah, he's getting to the point now where, you know, he has an assumption that any move that hurts him can be attributed to the web of bureaucracy below him, and that's not good enough at all for Delegate Watkins anymore. And quite rightfully, I guess, he decides to go on out of there and gets a dose of Burrell medicine, as Watkins forces him to consider the other angle and consider that, given his instruction, reassigning a detective is a sensible response. There was an immediate assumption that it was not on him. So there we go. He finally gets his comeuppance, as you say.
And no, most notably refuses to go after him.
Yes.
Just still maintains that pride.
Absolutely, yeah. Very, very aggravating to see. Yeah, but it is. We saw their chat about how he would now, you know, put Unetta off the ticket. It's time to put Marlo on. I respect loyalty. He said those words to Watkins back in episode 2, I think, and you know, it's gone nowhere now. And yeah, real shaming moment. But it is pretty.
Yeah, especially when he's saying about how you know, that he essentially doesn't know, he doesn't stand for anything.
Yeah.
He's forgotten his base, and nobody really knows what he means anymore.
He gets a right old potty mouth out, doesn't he, as he heads on out of there.
The whole house of cards has come tumbling down for him, and especially when we consider how he seemed at the start of season 3, and the power that he had over Carcetti as Carcetti was thinking about making his run. Like, It was just he was untouchable, and now it's very quickly just imploded around him.
Yeah, we just got to think back to that when the show drew that parallel between the meeting with the developers on the harbourfront condo developments versus Carcetti and the old people's home, where there was no interest at all.
Yeah.
And they've now completely turned their heads without us really noticing. It felt like a really natural progression to this point, and we've seen everything that really made it happen. So a lot of progress in a relatively short amount of time.
It's nice.
Yeah, and finally I guess there's that weird twist moment at the end, which is not drawn too much attention to, but Lieutenant Hoskins, Herc's old boss...
Yeah, he phones it in, doesn't he?
Yeah, so we know that obviously he is a mole for Rawls, and everyone seems to have their mole now, which is really, really not good for whoever's next in line to be in charge.
Well, Rawls especially likes to have his moles, so
Yeah,
they're tried and tested tactic.
excellent. And of course, we see that Rawls was very strong-headed and wasn't kind of entranced by Royce giving him this confidence boost. I'm sure it was a confidence boost when he said, he kind of inferred that you'd be the next commissioner if you stick by me. And Rawls has enough confidence to try and jump in the door of something new. And he's now going to, betray the current mayor in the hope that Carcetti will win. And I'm sure the polls are now saying that that's the case. But it is, a very bold move considering he was approached, personally by the mayor.
It's a stunningly clever move, really, because, like I say, he ends up in a position where no matter who wins, he's going to be better off for it. So it's a very, very clever move.
Absolutely.
I guess the last bit will be him meeting with Carcetti and Wilson.
Absolutely. Let's move on to that. So Rawls seeks out Carcetti and finds him doing door-to-door campaigning with Wilson. Rawls gives Carcetti the information about Watkins and Royce's fallout. Rawls tells Carcetti that he's disappointed with the mayor and wants the opportunity to do the right things with the department for a change. Wilson and Carcetti wait until Rawls is out of sight and then dash to their car to find Watkins. Carcetti finds Watkins at his office and tells him that he needs him, both now and after the election. He tells Watkins that if he offers his support, he will continue to have a voice in Carcetti's administration. Watkins questions him about why he should support Carcetti as he feels Royce is in a commanding lead, and wonders why he shouldn't support Tony Gray, another African-American candidate from his side of town. Carcetti then states that he is within 4 points of winning the election, and will give Watkins a large role in his administration due to the fact that he needs good African-American leaders, such as Watkins, to help govern Baltimore. Carcetti also emphasizes that he is the only candidate who can cause change from the damage Royce has done at this point in the primary. Watkins hears this and agrees to join Carcetti's ticket with Marlo. So
we start with a slightly, a bit of an awkward conversation that he's having with that guy on the street.
Yeah.
It's a really kind of generic, I'll do anything I can to, help you out and stuff, basically. Vote for me, I'm going for mayor. It almost sounds like something he might deliver earlier on.
Definitely.
Earlier on in his attempts.
We see he buys sort of 8 things from a car boot sale, doesn't he, just to appease people and the rest of it. So he's running around and keeping people happy, and Rawls is doing the same thing when he comes to see him. Rawls gives him a dose of Carcetti to Carcetti, where he says, I want to change, and you genuinely, the way that Rawls delivers it, there is a genuine sense that, this man has been misfired by a corrupt system his whole career and wants to finally do the right thing. And again, the spell is kind of there to be believed if you want to. So obviously it's good for Carcetti, and Carcetti's clearly warming to Rawls, particularly as he's giving him the news about Watkins here. Music to their ears.
It's interesting how we have when he disappears and goes around the corner and leaves, the car engine starts up as Carcetti and Wilson do. They kind of dash off and the engine immediately starts, and it's just kind of like a clever bit of sound editing there, just to rev us up as they dash off. Obviously, either that or we assume that they're all perfectly in sync with one another somehow, and he knows exactly when to stop.
Oh,
but yeah, no, it's just a nice little moment there, and they do indeed dash off and get as quickly as possible to see Odell Watkins.
Yeah,
and Carcetti does very well to convince him to get on side.
Definitely another classic Carcetti heartstring speech. Feels like we've seen plenty of them at this point, and again, one that's hard to run from. He really makes so many good points. Points out that
it's not spin, is it? It's genuine kind of
Yeah.
presentation. And he said before he's going to maintain that no spin attitude, and he does very well here. He's very earnest.
it's always easy to do that when everything's running in your favour. Of course, once he's in power, he's going to struggle to keep up with that no spin thing. Once he needs to spin things to stay in the public's positive eyes.
Once he starts getting those bowls of shit.
Yep. So certainly honourable at this point, but also easy at this point because everything is working out for him.
So yeah, shall we move on to the next big strand then? Because we've
Yeah,
still got quite a
sure.
bit to go, I think.
We do have a fair bit to go. Just worth mentioning that with the politics, everything is now very much set for this big election episode coming up next. It really feels like they've done a good job of establishing the stakes to a very high degree, and that we know an awful lot about it, so that we're going to have makes this election episode all the better. Okay, so 3 sections in the strand of major cases mixed up with Western District. They're combining forces this week. So firstly, Lieutenant Marimo meets with Assistant State Rhonda Perlman and Western District Commander Major Daniels to discuss executing a series of warrants in the Western District. Daniels obligingly provides Marimo with the extra manpower he'll require. Perlman warns Marimo that he's wasting his wiretap on low-level targets that she'll refuse to litigate against. Marimo tells Perlman that it's her problem when she refuses to accept responsibility for his mistakes. Marimo briefs his own men along with Daniels' DEU squad and Flex squad. Marimo tries to convince his men of the importance of the raids. After the briefing, Carver questions Herc about the logic of attempting street rips against Marlo's people. Herc continues to believe that drug dealers are stupid and easily dealt with. Carver asks Herc what he's doing for the mayor. Perlman discusses her career with Daniels. With Marimo in charge of the Major Crimes Unit and the subpoenas issued against Royce fundraisers, she has lost hope in her work and begins thinking where she can beg Demper to be reassigned.
Yeah, so we have Marimo continuing to be very irritating and going down a line that we know is worthless. Yeah, I suppose he's kind of giving this it feels very old-fashioned briefing now about how we're going to go and do these quick rips and having all these flex squads and everything. And nobody seems to be buying it.
No.
Although Herc seems to still believe that it will be easily sorted, and he also doesn't pick up at all on the political ramifications in his position with the mayor. So he's still being pretty clueless there. And Perlman seeming very disillusioned with the whole situation. And it's probably, in a strange sort of way, wishing that she was actually dealing with Freeman rather than Marimo, because although Freeman might be pulling out all these big cards at inappropriate times, at least he's doing something that's somewhat interested in doing genuine police work, as opposed to Marimo, who just seems to care about busting in doors and making a bit of a scene of everything.
Yeah, definitely. You be careful what you wish for, I guess. And having said that, it's nice to know that Perlman will be, she really is going to get boosted in a couple of episodes' time. Unbeknownst to her, she's really going to start flying up the ranks and deal with stuff that really does matter, because Rupert Bond will be a very worthy replacement for a Demper.
Yep, that's right.
Very quick scene. Again, Marimo, as you say, being very overly egotistical and living in the clouds almost with how this police work should be done. Certainly a character painted with very broad brushstrokes, and his speech to the Western says as much as that. And just kind of reminiscent of those original busts in season 1. The very early ones where they just sort of, out of pressure from Burrell and the judge, they just jumped on those low rises and came with peanuts, and they'd moved the stash houses. Different this time is that they're intentionally planned as some sort of misguided vanity project for Marimo. So in many ways this is far worse. Herc and Carver back at it again. Now very much a teacher-student relationship for them. It's not so much a buddy thing, particularly with Carver really saying to Herc, look, if you're really a careerist, you should be thinking a bit more clearly about what your career means and taking the opportunities when they're there. And lo and behold, we see Herc later on at the volunteering at the Royce office, just flying the flag for Royce. That's not going to work, unfortunately, but still. And So putting Herc in his place in a couple of ways, and does seem to take Herc by surprise.
Yeah, he's clearly not even considered it.
Definitely. It's kind of comforting, though, because, if Royce were to stay in power, what it would mean for Herc is possibly disastrous. We might see him as the deputy commissioner within 10 years or something, based on The Secret.
And then Baltimore definitely is going completely down.
Yep. I mean, probably still be a better one than Valchek in some ways. I'm not too sure, but yeah. Apples and pears. Okay.
Right, so let's move on to the raids themselves, I suppose.
Sure. One thing I did think was weird, though, is when Daniels and Perlman were having that conversation in the office, like quite a personal, career path conversation, despite the fact that they live together as a couple. But I guess, that's just the moment that they're in. Don't need to get another scene out. All right. Sorry. Random comments out of the way. A couple more bits. So, Marimo's raids are disastrous. Stash houses from the wiretap have long since moved, and very few arrests are made. Even Herc is disappointed with their results. Like Herc, Marimo believes that the drug dealers are stupid and claims they must have been tipped about the raids. Marimo diverts the blame from himself onto his sergeant by insisting that he find out more about Marlo. Carver steps in with some information about Marlo. He holds court in the same open area, but otherwise moves around. Marimo tells Herc to come up with an investigative plan using this tip. Herc himself starts to believe that buy-bust, rip-and-run busts won't take down Marlo Stanfield, and with squad members Officer Dozeman and Sidner, they set up a concealed surveillance camera at Marlo's meeting place. They hurry away from the location, but their efforts are noticed by Marlo's lieutenant.
And as I mentioned before about rare moments in The Wire and characters getting their comeuppance, this is the other one. Marimo, a dislikable character, getting his comeuppance quite quickly and in a big way. We've not spent all that much time with Marimo, generally speaking, but he's kind of gone from this destroyer of the unit to being shown just how rubbish his ways really are in a very plain way. And despite all that, it's interesting that he still kind of chooses to see it as, they must be stupid, someone must have told him. But it also does seem like it's a bit of quite a humiliation for him as well.
Oh, definitely. He's still not willing to believe that the criminals have more intelligence than him, though. That's a line he won't cross.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trust Colicchio to be the first one into the bust with that battering ram. I thought that was quite fun, just to make it clear that Colicchio's never going to change. And trust Carver to be the one who knows where Marlo hangs out from time to time. Being the new watchful eye on the neighbourhood, and it's nice that he's thinking it's so no one can drop wire on him. I certainly hadn't thought of that myself. And, there we go. So Carver, again, proving to be a very, very competent cop.
Now, do we have to take back the thing about Herc learning nothing? Because we've said before how Herc is one of these characters who just doesn't seem to actually learn anything by the end of it. He's still very much the same person, and has also somehow affected an incredible amount of change. Here he learns that buy-bust isn't always the way, and remembers all of that surveillance equipment work that they did and applies it. So he kind of learns something there. It does lead to a trademark Herc fuck-up anyway, but he does kind of learn something, even if it doesn't actually really make much of a difference. In fact, it puts him in a very difficult situation, which leads him into an even greater fuck-ups as a result. But there's a sort of an attempt to learn something, which I think before we've not really seen or maybe recognised that from Herc.
No, definitely. Yeah, that's fair. As you say, he certainly thinks back to the whole surveillance thing. The way he does carry out the surveillance is fairly not thought through at all. And they go at it like a bull in a china shop in the middle of the night. No wonder it doesn't work at all. But yeah.
And also it seems pretty obvious that someone like Marlo, and again, I guess they're just underestimating him, but it seems pretty obvious that he's going to have someone there keeping an eye on the place that he hangs out for that very reason. It would be very easy for someone to come along and set up some kind of bug or whatever to spy on him, and Marlo knows that. But
yeah,
they just completely underestimated him in that regard.
As Carver says, it's the reason they hang out there is because they know that they can get wire hung on them elsewhere. Might as well make sure this place at least stays clean of wires. So yeah, certainly underestimating them yet again. Yeah, no McNulty. Is he on leave or something? It seems like a perfect McNulty scene for him to appear. I guess he just has other commitments.
Yeah, nothing in that bit now.
Right.
And I guess that kind of leads into where we see them doing the surveillance overnight.
Yep, so our final section. Sidner is left to man the surveillance camera overnight. When Herc returns, he believes that the camera will build a case for them if they can find someone who can read lips to tell them what Marlo is saying. Sidner questions the legality of the approach, but Herc dismisses his concerns. Herc leaves Sidner wondering when he will get some relief from manning the surveillance. Herc spends the morning making campaign calls for Royce. His direct approach has some success with the voters.
So, like you said before, it's not a particularly well thought out style of surveillance.
Yeah.
It's completely lacking in any subtlety. Herc also seems like not a particularly good person to lead the project, and he just kind of leaves Sidner there. He's he just kind of leaves. He doesn't really have much empathy for the guy who's got to sit there. He's just, I'm a sergeant now, so I can make all these decisions.
Yeah, so cheeky.
And then it kind of leads on to the bit where we have another bit where maybe Herc is trying to learn something by taking up what he heard from Carver in campaigning for the mayor. And he actually seems to click with it in a strange sort of way, but only because he's basically a bullshit salesman, which he's particularly good at.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, he kind of really sells that, and it's basically like, it's obvious that you should vote for him. Like,
yeah.
It's really just a load of nonsense.
I mean, he's very good at reducing the whole thing to a big racial thing. You know, that's pretty much what he...
A white guy is telling you to vote for a black guy. I can't possibly be wrong. It's just so stupid.
In some ways, you got to credit him for really, showing the shambles that it is. Like, there's not much real stuff to it here at all, and but
it seems oddly convincing, doesn't it?
Yeah. So there we go. It's that is hilarious, absolutely. And the woman.
Details.
She says, and I think the woman on the other end of the phone says something like, "You must love him," or something like that. She says,
"Yeah, I'll think about it."
Yeah. Yeah. So there we are. There's the very literal response to the whole. Let's drop some surveillance on Marlo. Just shove a camera near him. And
also a very literal response to, shouldn't you be around waving campaign poster or something?
Yeah, that's the key word with...
He just jumps head first.
Yeah, no subtlety, but in the china shop. That's Herc. Okay. Speaking of people that are a little bit more careful with their actions, let's go and see what the Stanfields are up to. And we have 3 sections again, much shorter sections though, thankfully. So firstly, Marlo and Chris discuss how to deal with Omar after his robbery of Marlo at a card game. Marlo wants to go straight after Omar through placing a bounty on him. Chris convinces Marlo that a subtle approach will prevent Omar targeting them in return. So there's the key word, subtle approach. What did you make of it?
Yep. So Chris very wisely advises against going after Omar so publicly, learning from Avon's mistakes. And he talks about how, he turned the whole town upside down trying to get him and only ended up looking weak. So they've clearly been watching and learning themselves. We were talking about people not really learning much. These guys definitely are. It's interesting that Marlo is quite willing to go down the bounty route. Obviously didn't have the straight-up confidence for Chris and Snoop to go after him. Yeah.
No, that is true. It's very similar to the Stringer and Avon conversations of Season 1. Which were again about Omar and how to tackle going up against his legendary status and his ability to go into the wind. It really feels like the conversation was ripped out of that basketball scene almost, actually, in Season 1. And we sense how much of Marlo's kind of unencumbered thirst for recognition it's probably been tempered by Chris's logic and his advice, and it's a really, really good duo here, a really good mix of brains. And it must be harder for Marlo than Avon. Really, because Marlo has so much more thirst for that ego, but Marlo is smart nonetheless, and he knows that Chris is right. We should hold back.
Yeah, it's wise counsel indeed.
Yeah, and this is the first time I guess we see, the crew hanging out and just ruling their empire almost, and discussing tactics. And of course, we saw the Barksdales do loads of this stuff when they were the dominant power. Firstly in Orlando's, then in the funeral home, later in Marlo's military warehouse, Avon's military warehouse in the end of season 3. These guys are happy to sit out on the streets. I guess when his name has been mythologized like Omar's, perhaps it makes sense that no one would dare cap him. He wants to show himself off to the world rather than hide away. I hadn't considered, Carver's idea of it being to do with wiretaps, but it makes a lot of sense.
No one fucks with me now.
Yeah. So it's that kind of element.
There's no reason to hide.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it does embody Marlo's personality quite well. But equally, I don't think Marlo has enough personality to really have this fronting HQ business place. Whether it be a strip club or a funeral home or something else, it wouldn't quite feel right. It feels like Marlo would want to be more independent than that and wouldn't really want anyone else fronting for him.
Yeah, that's all good stuff there. It's just kind of like a short little bit where we have them in council, really. They're in session.
Yeah, and just sort of pointing out those differences again between the Barksdale and Stanfield administrations and the way they do their day-to-day ruling. Let's move on to the second bit. So at the next meeting, Chris reports that Slim Charles approached him to organise a second meeting between Prop Joe and Marlo. Oldface Andre arrives to talk to Marlo. Marlo tells him that his store is going to be robbed again, and instructs him to identify Omar as responsible to the police. Andre worries that Omar will seek revenge, but Marlo tells him Omar will not return from being arrested. Chris later conducts the robbery of the store with Snoop. He shoots a delivery woman who is stocking Andre's shelves, killing her and pistol whipping Andre. Before leaving the store, Chris reminds Andre to blame Omar. Chris reports into Marlo that the robbery was a success. Marlo tells him about the surveillance camera and then asks him to take him to the meeting with Prop Joe.
All right. So, yes, we have the meeting that they have. Marlo giving the order to Chris to make it no bail, as he says.
Yes, that's right. And there's a real sly smile from Chris when we hear that, and really, really good. Just the right amount of information, really. Not, being as subtle as Marlo would be with the whole approach, and making it clear that there is a murder coming if you listen carefully.
Not only that, but in that line, it indicates what the purpose of it is. This isn't just some, when we have this delivery lady killed, as tragic as it is, and we'll come on to that. It shows the kind of the straight up purpose behind it is very obvious to us, the audience. So when comparing that death of the delivery woman to the security guard from earlier, it does show how it can be seen that it could be a more random death by comparison.
Yeah.
And that normally we expect there to be something to gain, and it is spelled out very literally here. But again, maybe he truly is a psychopath. I mean,
yeah, and
who
this
in
is
that
certainly
particular instant maybe did it for reasons that we can't know.
Yeah, no, very true. And I like the fact that Chris knows about the whole you don't get bail on robbery thing. Clearly, certainly an experienced man when it comes to the criminal system, and seems to, as we say, compliment Marlo a lot. And yeah, just a real sense that they're completely in control. They're completely pulling these strings. They've got no competitors. And yeah, everything goes very smoothly. And they really withhold a lot of information in that exchange with Andre. And it's only once the next Omar stick-up will take place that we'll see how amazingly thought out their alternative option was, even if it is kind of subtly referred to beforehand.
And of course, when it comes to enacting the robbery itself, we are in classic Wire style. We're built up to be knocked down. We have this nice smiley delivery lady, and they help her get the packages into the store, and they kind of like have a nice exchange beforehand, and he just shoots her. Like, it's just absolutely wiping her away without a care.
Oh yeah, it's so brutal.
It's really shocking.
Again, it's that a great indication of what we love about Chris. That's that mixture between that genuine compassion and sense of empathy, and then complete disconnection and distance, and being a sociopath really.
He just switches it on and
yeah,
off.
Completely. And we saw it again with the speech to Michael earlier. That kind of really emotive speech about the family and you one of us, and yeah, just very, very, very fascinating.
And then just leaves it up to Andre to tell the lie of it being Omar. even though it's not really something that we'd believe in even if we heard about it and hadn't seen it for ourselves. It's a slight hole in their plan, perhaps. Maybe they don't know about Omar's code enough, or it is a bit of a oversight on their part that it's not all that believable that Omar would just rob some store, and especially killing. It was believable that he might rob the stash house, but it's more like he's not going to kill a delivery lady like that. It's not that's not something that we would normally expect from him.
Yeah. Well, it was a means to an end at the end of the day. It was just a little business transaction.
Yeah, they certainly don't feel like they've lost anything, and they have no qualms with shooting people in that way. So, again, it's just another case of they have something to gain, but they're also in a position where they're not going to lose much if it goes wrong as well.
Yeah, definitely. And then they go and agree to meet with Joe after that. So it's not clear if they have an inkling that Joe pulled the Omar stunt with the car game last week. I'm sure they haven't ruled it out. So
that must be our third section for this strand. Then.
Yeah. Quickly before the end, did you think it was an attempted murder? Because where was she shot? She was shot kind of in the torso, wasn't she? And her eyes are ambiguously open at the end. She does look kind of dead, but I don't know. Obviously, attempted murder and actual murder are kind of treated the same way. Obviously, it wouldn't be attempted murder, but it was intended to be as such. So she'd be a non-lethal shot, to be slightly less brutal. She'd still survive, but they'd still get Omar arrested for the same crime. Knowing Marlo, though, I don't see why he'd make that concession, having seen what he did with the security guard last week. So,
yeah, why go to that extent? There's no need to be that specific about it.
Yeah. So
they don't need special dead; they need just dead.
That's very true. So I think when you think about it with Marlo and the way he operates, it wouldn't make sense that they'd go through that measure. You could perhaps see Avon or Stringer making that call. All right, final section with the Stanfields. At the meeting, Joe tells him that he has a network of sources that provide him with information about activity on the street and within the justice system. He shows Marlo warrants for a drug kingpin named Charlie. Joe tells Marlo he might help Charlie but may not, as he's outside of the co-op. Marlo asks Joe about the video surveillance and finally agrees to work with the co-op in exchange for information about those investigating him. So, they've finally got their reason to talk to Prop Joe now.
Yeah, Prop Joe with the information. It's not quite clear how he gets all this information, but he gets it.
Well, no, it's made clear in the very final episode of the show. It's not brought up until then.
Yeah, well, it's made clear then, but at this point, we don't know.
Certainly,
in terms of the first time viewer, one doesn't know at this point. Obviously, we do find out later on and see a bit of I suppose it's like a mini montage in a way of how this information is being gathered.
Yeah, it's nice that they bring this up on an episode that's about a lot of moles and leaks, and just makes it seem all the more credible that there is yet another leak that links to Prop Joe from the police department, and it seems quite believable in that sense.
Yeah, there's no sanctity with any of this information. It's all available as far as they're concerned.
Yeah. And
so Marlo finally has a good reason to join. He's kind of pushed into it, but he's not really doing it out of any desire to actually help people or be cooperative in terms of the literal sense of the term. He just has something to gain from it. Now he has a reason to actually get something out of it, and that's about it, really.
Yeah, absolutely. The carrot he's been dangling is sort of paid off now, and a lot of it wasn't really because of Prop Joe. He got lucky that the surveillance camera came out with Herc. Herc was actually the instigator here. He was half the reason they went into the co-op in the end. And of course, this draws on what we were saying earlier about our misinterpretation, or certainly my misinterpretation of last episode. It wasn't until now that they finally agreed to join. And last week was therefore clearly just a bit of a fuck you, and I'm a lonesome independent drug dealer and you can go and screw yourself.
But you were right about what you said about it, in that it is, it's a big mistake in a way for Prop Joe because it leads to his death.
Yeah.
So, it's not. It turns out not to be a good move.
Definitely, yeah. So there we go. Prop Joe finally cracked Marlo. You've got to applaud, really. He's done the impossible in what seemed like the impossible, and he's got much softer eyes than Stringer, as we saw when
right,
Slim
yeah.
Charles said, you better have better shit to say than Stringer did. He really brought the bacon. Like he had a much more devious plan.
I think you could rely on Prop Joe for that.
Yeah, definitely. Even if you wouldn't be able to see it beforehand, and when you see how these men operate, you see how simplistic Stringer's version of running things was. Like he had a mind for economics, but not really for the politics of the game and for all this manipulation and behind the scenes puppetry. He didn't really think on those planes in the same way.
All right, so that's Marlo in this episode.
Yep, okay, 2 more strands, and they're both very short. So, Homicide, 2 little sections. So, Bunk and Lester scour Baltimore looking for bodies they can tie to Marlo in the hope of finding Lex. They check with the coroner's office, in the sewers, and in Leakin Park. Freeman recalls coming to the park to look for a body as a cadet, and being warned to only take an interest in bodies matching their description, or they would need more time. When they return to the office empty-handed, Bunk convinces Freeman to turn his attention back to investigating real murders.
All right, so we go very quickly through quite a few scenes here. I'm just thinking of the actual chronology of the episode itself. We go through quite a few bits.
Yes.
In haste in order to catch up. So we go from Marimo having that quick meeting, and then we go to the coroner's office very quickly to get caught up with what Bunk and Freeman are doing, and then it moves on again.
I think
we follow sort of Lester's fruitless search here.
It's nicely peppered through the episode, yeah, and great comment from the coroner as he tells the detectives they don't have enough work. A brilliant reminder about you got to wait for your turn to give a fuck sort of thing, and although we know that finding Lex is the key to solving Fruit's murder, so in a way they are doing what they're meant to do, but you can understand from another point of view it looks very much like a big effort that they don't need to go through.
And it's also interesting, I can imagine some might say that Freeman should really think to try vacant houses. He seems to have considered almost any other option, though somebody could be dumped without being found, except for vacant houses, of which it's known that there are many in Baltimore.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that it hasn't crossed his mind at all at this case. At this stage, it seems.
I guess we've got to remember that there's thousands of vacants in Baltimore at this point.
It's quite an ask to be trawling through all of them, but I mean, if he's willing to go down Leakin Park, and we know that that's such a big place with so many opportunities, and he's willing to try it anyway, it seems like he might try that too, even if it was only on a very small scale.
Yeah, I mean, Leakin Park obviously has the history. It's a known place for this sort of thing. The Vacants is a new invention. I do agree that the Vacants does seem like a fairly obvious choice, particularly as it is.
Slim Charles thinks to suggest it.
Yeah, I guess.
I don't know if that's because it's happened before or because it's just maybe what he would do, or
there's such an important
it's
part
not
of the.
Expressly said, is it?
Yeah, it's true that it does sound like he's seen it happen in the same way that Dookie does when he mentions it. I guess they're a really important part of the Western, aren't they? These Vacants make up a big part of the Western, and these guys are much more familiar with them, and Freeman perhaps just doesn't have them crossing his mind. But I am sympathetic to people that think it is perhaps a little bit of a way of saving time and longing out the whole process by having him wait so long to have this eureka moment with the Vacants. And we have the second stop in Leakin Park. I thought it was Lincoln Park actually, until just from the accents, until we were told otherwise by Gil. But yeah, a known body dumping spot.
Yeah, we obviously have Bunk feeling like he's being taken for a little bit of a ride, especially at the bit where they're checking the sewers and he's having a little dance, having a little groove.
Yeah.
Which is very amusing. And just kind of uses that little mini arc, like you say, peppered throughout the other parts of the show, just to have a little mini arc going on there where Bunk uses all of that to bring him, when he's back at the office, just to bring him back to reality and say, if you want buddies, here they are. They're on the board. This is the work we should be doing. Yeah,
and that's very much a Bunk thing to do. And again, Bunk doesn't want another Doberman's gun style side plot. He wants to stay on the job, and he's good police. He's not necessarily natural police, but he knows what he knows, and he likes the structure of his job. Unlike Freeman and McNulty, who treasure their own investigation that they can do independently at their own pace and discovering something that's new. And they're a good double act, but they certainly do have fairly big differences in the way they work.
Definitely, yeah.
But he does make a good point. Regardless of whether they find Lex or not, they have enough evidence at this point to say that the case will go into the black either way. So what's the point in chasing him? And I think that is a very, very good point that Freeman can't really argue against, and therefore they're going back to the homicide rotation. So makes sense.
All right, shall we move on?
Yeah. Okay. Final section for homicide. At the office, Ed Norris, Vernon Holly, Greggs and Mackie watch Gray talk about the witness case on television. Greggs is later called in to meet with Jay Landsman. Landsman tells her that Norris is back on the Braddock witness case. Rawls plans to claim that Norris and Greggs were always working the case together. Greggs is dismayed that she is being humiliated a second time. Landsman tells Greggs that she must be more ready to play the political side of the spectrum now that she is in the high-profile homicide unit. Finally, Landsman insists that Greggs must attend a press conference about the investigation. Yeah. Actually, I'll quickly add on to the end here. Actually, no, we'll do it after. It's a little tiny section at the end. So.
So first up, just want to say that I really like Kima's homicide look. She kind of has a new look for homicide, which I kind of think suits her really well. It kind of gives her this new era in her police work, and she seems a lot more confident and at ease, and seems to fit in a lot more already. Joining in with the jokes rather than being the butt of them. Although there is still I suppose, still a newbie sense to it all.
Yeah.
There's a certain weathering to it that we can see as well. Similar with Prez, he's not suddenly all clued up on everything, but there's a greater confidence in the way he's trying to act. I really like the "that would be me, that would be you" bit that we have from Norris. So I really like that. Yeah,
it certainly communicates it very well, doesn't it? And really, really demonstrates the sort of meddling going on here. Rawls has put in, I guess, a good recovery strategy, as delivered from Landsman to us, and really giving Kima that rocky introduction to homicide. She's certainly weathered in very quickly following all this stuff, and particularly with all the initiations. If the system looks like a laughingstock to anyone, it's definitely going to be to Greggs. I don't think it's been exposed more for its flaws to anyone, actually, apart from the viewers, us.
And Landsman is brilliant here, given the reality of homicide to Kima. This high-profile unit, they know our names up here. So it's getting a bit of a down-to-earth discovery of what it's like to actually be in the homicide unit, and that you can't rely on being tucked away in some detail office. Literally was the case in season 1, and when they were literally tucked down underneath all the buildings and pushed underground, pushed out of sight. Now they're very much up high in the public eye, in the eye of the media, and under a lot of scrutiny. Yep,
very, very good point, yeah. And first discovery that Forster is in hospital with cancer, as Landsman refers to failed chemotherapy. So he hasn't found out about this, the whole scandal with the detectives being moved, and probably for the best of him, as he doesn't seem to cope too well with stress, Forster. But the reference to his illness is actually a reference to his real-life illness as well. I'm not too sure if it was cancer, but he was certainly very ill during the filming of Season 4, and died during or just after the season finished filming. And of course there is a wake in his memory a few episodes' time, in the same way they remembered Rob Colesbury in last season.
That's right.
Right.
So, you wanted to add a small bit on the end.
Yes, literally a couple of lines. Crutchfield and Holly catch the case of the woman murdered in Andre's store. When they interview him, he's quick to identify Omar. And that's it.
Yep, Andre doing as he's told, basically.
Yep. He hesitates, but, he points to Omar. Omar used to be the ultimate fear, who you could never talk about. And now Marlo has certainly superseded his position. Marlo is far more worthy of fear than Omar is now, which is quite something. Okay.
All right. let's move on to our final
Strand and final section. Just one for Bubbles here. So Bubbles spots Sherrod working for a drug dealing crew and chastises him for truanting. Sherrod's customer takes exception to Bubbles' interruption and attacks him for his money. Bubbles is humiliated in front of several bystanders. When Sherrod returns to their dwelling in a vacant house that night, Bubbles tells him that he can stay for the night only and then must leave unless he attends school the next day.
Yeah, we've seen Bubbles in quite a few scrapes up to this point, but this is probably his worst, and it's his worst very suddenly as well. Just very quickly, this guy just attacks, and not going to be the last time that this guy attacks as well. We see quite a few moments with Bubbles, just very, very literally being pushed down onto the ground, and he's just being forced down by the world around him. And this guy he's almost like a mini force of nature as well, in the same much smaller Marlo in a way. He doesn't have much of a crew; it's just him, but he goes around terrorizing Bubbles because he can, I guess.
Yeah.
Sherrod doesn't do anything to intervene, as Bubbles has a go at him for later. But he also understands why, because, as he says, he would have done the same kind of nothing. That's how the corners be, as he says. And that's why he wants to keep him off him, because he knows exactly what it's like to be pushed into that position, and he knows Sherrod is going to end up there as well if he doesn't seriously rethink the kind of trajectory he wants to take in his life.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, very, very sad stuff. And the first of many encounters with this pest, who is a mainstay of this season, really. A bit like Sherrod. And
does this character even have a name?
I'm not sure, potentially. I don't think so, actually. He's just the pest. The very, very just an incredibly hateful character. Although he's happy to sweet talk Sherrod, but is very, very willing to go straight to violence with Bubbles to get what he wants.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's much in that. It's very much Bubbles-focused violence throughout the whole thing. So I don't know what it is that he has against Bubbles. Maybe it's the shopping cart and the idea that Bubbles is trying to make something of himself and is better equipped to be entrepreneurial and, bettering of himself. Perhaps there's jealousy there that he just objects to. I don't know, but it is curious why that's the case.
And is it also when they're back in their little dwelling, Bubbles, is it that he sees these gel caps on the table and kind of hides himself away from it at the end?
Okay.
Because the camera kind of points towards the table, there's something sat on the table that he looks at and turns away, and I think it's like there's some gel caps on the table and he sees that and kind of reminded of his own temptations to the street, and he kind of pulls the covers over him and crosses his arms across his head like to hide himself away, to shut it out. Yeah,
I do remember that now, actually. I didn't know what was being referred to in that pan, so I didn't actually write anything down, but you're right, yeah. Is it caps? Yeah. Because, Bubbles, I'm sure, is still taking heroin every night. It's not like Sherrod is therefore, lesser than him, but... yeah, perhaps it's just trying to distance himself from all of that really, and hoping that Sherrod will come around and
trying to stick to his own words this time.
Yeah, got to have that integrity. Yeah, so it's quite a nice abode, actually, isn't it? The sort of candlelit dwelling they've got. Not too much from the outside, but inside it looks relatively homey. Not bad for a couple of homeless people, and. At the end of his tether with Sherrod, really.
Yeah, this is it. Go to school or you're out.
Yeah.
So it's they're made very clear here about what needs to be done.
Yeah. And I've just realised, of course, the gel caps would be more of an allusion to Sherrod selling them rather than any drug taking. So I guess Sherrod has now been lured back into the corner away from school that Bubbles wants him to go to. So that must be what it is, isn't it? Sort of distancing himself from the idea that he's sloping back onto the corners.
But also as a temptation to Bubbles.
Yes, quite possibly. It doesn't seem very Bubbles at all to... Oh, of course, so he'd be taking Sherrod's produce for free sort of thing. Yeah, that's very true.
So he's kind of conflicted there when he's, as a dope fiend, he's naturally inclined to take it when he sees it, but there's just a whole list of reasons why on this occasion he's making an exception and literally, like I say, hiding himself away from it, like pulling the covers over and crossing his arms over his head, like as if it's like some kind of protective stance.
Yeah, sorry about that. It took me a while to fully appreciate what that scene means, but yeah, I'll get it now. Yeah, that's certainly a very good scene for that.
And that's it, isn't it? That's our recap.
Yeah, definitely. Probably worth mentioning just about Bubbles at the end as well, that it's so great to see how much patience he has with Sherrod, and he's given him so many chances, and he's been on the street for so long and learned about what motivates people, and you get a sense of how well placed he'd be if he were in a role where he was able to make something of himself. If he was just slightly above the street that he's on, like he'd be such a very, very a human being with lots of potential, essentially. And that's something that's...
Had he been born in very different circumstances, there's no telling what he might have ended up as.
Definitely, yeah. He could have ended up as the mayor, as I believe he is on a very recent TV show that's been released here. Andre Royo plays the mayor of... again, very uninformed of me to not mention any details about this show, but I haven't been able to commit it to memory.
All right, well, as we move towards our final sections, would you fancy joining me in skipping over favourite characters and favourite scenes, which I think is just literally impossible in this particular episode?
Yeah, might as well. Let's let it lie.
Look, we always in the market for a good soldier. You see one we like, we take care of the situation. Take him in, school him, make him family. And if you're with us, you're with us. Just like we be with you all the way. You have a mind, you're in.
Look, man, I already got a family. My mom's and my little brother.
Yeah, heard that. But think on it. We be around, you need something.
Let's just jump straight into our... let's jump straight into the title, Alliances. Now, the most obvious alliance attempting to be formed here seems to be between Chris. Well, it seems to be very specifically Chris and Michael. Although Snoop is there, she's kind of not really delivering it in the same way. She's just like almost just backup. So it's very much this alliance between Chris and Snoop, the first kind of male adult that Michael might take some kind of guidance from. But we also have Marlo entering now into the alliance with Prop Joe as well. What else? What other alliances did you pick up on coming under the title?
Yeah, so as you say, Michael and Chris is a very good one. I think obviously the MCU and the Western joining forces for an episode was a clear alliance.
Yeah, that's true.
Carcetti and Watkins joining forces at the end. And
Watkins, after Watkins having broken an alliance with Royce.
And not just Watkins, but a very general shift in alliance away from Royce, allegiance away from Royce, from everyone really. So there's a big shift in the tables there. So I'm sure there are some more there, but those are the ones.
Rawls making his alliances with anyone he can.
Yep, and certainly Hoskins, if not anyone else. And trying to get onto Carcetti's ear. So it's all sorts of chess pieces moving around this episode, really. And setting up a very, very eventful election episode for next week, which is actually I think my favourite standalone episode of the show, Margin of Error. So I'll be looking forward to that.
It's a stunner.
It is absolutely fantastic.
Let's take a quick look at our epigraph then. If you're with us, you're with us, says Chris, again in the scene where he's trying to convince Michael.
Another one fresh
again, it's just kind of a tautology, another wire tautology, really. Definitely,
yeah, fresh from that supercut. And I guess if we're trying to break it down, the second use of that "you with us," obviously there's two of them, hence the tautology, but the second use of that is trying to stress the loyalty of that allegiance. So if you with us, you with us. and will treat you like one of our own. All we've known of alliances on this show is that that's true so far as it benefits the individual with the most power. And of course, once there's no need for that alliance anymore, from their perspective, they break off. And that's a point that D'Angelo particularly kept trying to make to Donette. I seem to remember in season 1 and 2.
Yeah.
That would be the most direct kind of comparison to that. But it's a theme that runs throughout everything in the show, really.
Yeah, these alliances are hard to forge and easily broken. So it's it's an interesting statement to make here and very weightily delivered from Chris. But like you say, he's trying to point out in order to convince Michael that it's not going to be half-assed. It's going to be a very serious kind of working relationship that they'll have.
Yeah. Definitely, yeah. And do they ever cast Michael off? To their credit, they never cast Michael off in the whole time that they're with him. In fact, it's the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure, they haven't ruled it out, but he was still useful to them by the end of the show.
And I suppose you could think of what Weebay was saying about the same kind of loyalty that was had back with Avon. Now, things being different, it seems like there was more. It used to be more alliances. If somebody used to, would behave the way that Marlo did, they'd find themselves in Leakin Park. Well, there must have been much stronger alliances between everyone in order to ensure that kind of behaviour wasn't going on. But now, generally speaking, there's a lot more fear and distrust on the streets.
Yeah. Yep, definitely.
So, anything else you want to say about Season 4, Episode 5?
No, not particularly. I mean, I probably enjoyed the political stuff the best here, really, alongside the Stanfields. And there's obviously a little bit of a horror theme running through with the kids, that zombie stuff, and the dark nighttime scenes in the almost haunted vacants. That stuff never comes back. That spell has been broken, as we said before. So that feels kind of like the end of a small era of the show, at least. And so that's certainly a bit of a theme that carried through the episode. And it was nice to see Prez bonding with the real kids rather than the tough exteriors they put out in the classroom in the first episodes. So some really good developments here. Really, really good episode. Yeah,
very, very strong. And like you say, it builds us into the next episode with our election really well.
Yeah. Oh, boy, it's going to be good.
So that's what we'll be coming to next week.
Yep.
Margin of error, as you said.
My favourite standalone episode of the show, I'm pretty sure. So, one to look forward to. Definitely. So hopefully you'll join us for that. And in the meantime, feel free to contact us about this episode or any other episode at caughtonthewire@gmail.com. And there's all the other episodes available online, especially if you've joined us and you've taken a look at the iTunes feed. You might be wondering where all of the episodes are. They're all available at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com, as well as you can find more information about the show, and you can download all of the episodes, get access to the YouTube, all that sort of thing. Until next week, we shall leave you with this.